IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Trev, it's a great day, man. We got beautiful snow coming down. Our backyard looks glorious. I love snow when I'm inside. It's beautiful when I'm inside.
Yeah.
I'm making chicken fettuccine Alfredo for dinner tonight. A lot of good stuff going on. And there's something else. What is it? Oh, that's right. We get to talk about the national championship matchup between Notre Dame and Ohio State. Guys, we're going to be breaking it down all week. Going to be a lot of fun. And today, our focus is going to be on the matchup between the Notre Dame defense and the Ohio State offense. And our focus is going to be on just kind of looking at these two matchups. We'll look at it from, we'll break down the Ohio State offense, talk about why it's a dangerous offense. It's not just dangerous because they have talented players. That's obviously a part of it, but there's other reasons why it's dangerous. How Notre Dame stacks up against this Ohio State offense. We'll talk about we'll talk about how they stack up on paper. We're going to dive into a lot of this, Trev, to break down this matchup. And then, of course, speaking of matchups, we'll get into later in the show some matchups that matter. What are the matchups that Notre Dame has to win in order to dominate this, or not to dominate, but just to win this game? I don't care if they win by a point, just to thrive in this matchup and put themselves in position to win this football game. So that's what we're going to talk about today, Trev. I'm excited about it. How are you today? Are you ready? You ready to roll, man? I know the answer to that question, but I might as well ask it anyway.
No, I appreciate it, man. I mean, I'm ready. You know me, stay ready, never have to get ready. So I am ready to keep diving into this one. And with every day that approaches, we're 6 days out now. It's Tuesday, games next Monday. And it's just, again, you get a little bit more antsy every single day. Man, I thought I was getting bad leading up to the Sugar Bowl and getting bad leading up to the Orange Bowl, where it was just one of those where, man, I just wish that the game was tomorrow. But for the sake of cranking out content, as goofy as it sounds, like I need to feel like I'm ready for the game. You know what I mean? Like I need to know that like I've watched all my film and done everything that I can on my end. I know it sounds silly, but it's one of those where you don't get to see these games a whole lot. Last time I watched this game was almost 13 years ago. So it is exciting. I'm ready to dive into it, man. Let's get after it today.
Well, obviously, Trev, we're going to start with the Notre Dame defense against the Ohio State offense, because I think this is the most intriguing matchup from a big picture standpoint because of the perception of these two units, right? I mean, there's a perception that Ohio State is such a great team because of their offense. We talked yesterday that really the reason they're a great team is because their defense is outstanding, but their offense is incredibly dangerous. And of course, it's played really well in the first two playoff games and scored a ton of points. And that's why everybody was like, hey, this team is lights out, hands down, best team in the playoff right now. I don't know how anybody beats this team, all these type of things, right? And then, of course, the Notre Dame defense is the reason they're here. Notre Dame is here because of their defense, and this is the unit that has really carried this program the last couple of years, and this is the unit that, if they're going to win a championship, has to play well. And so you put this matchup together, and it's the Ohio State offense, which is when they struggle, that team is very beatable. When they play well, that team is very hard to beat. That's been the story, because you're going to get pretty much the same thing from the Ohio State defense week after week after week. We've pretty much had that all year, with just a couple small exceptions. Ohio State, when their offense plays well, has just rolled people. It's true for Notre Dame as well. When Notre Dame offense plays well, you have no chance to beat this team. And USC found that out. Even if the defense doesn't play well, you still can't beat Notre Dame if the offense is playing well. And so we'll dive into that. But when the defense is playing really well, Notre Dame is hard to beat. And so we'll get into this matchup, Trev, and talk about it. But look, this is the kind of deal. This is why this matchup is so important, in my opinion, Trevor, is because Ohio State has such a good defense. You cannot afford to make this a shootout game. You cannot afford to have the same struggles that Tennessee had, that Oregon had in this game. And we'll talk a lot about the early start to the game when we get the keys to victory, because Ohio State, it has been a very fast starting team in the playoff, very fast starting team in the playoff. And when they're at their best, they jump all over people, and then their defense is just like a giant anaconda. They just choke you out. You just have no chance. And so if Notre Dame is going to win this game, this side of the ball for the Irish, the defense has to play really well. Because if it gets into a shootout, I don't know how. I don't see. It's hard for me to see a path to a Notre Dame victory in that regard. I mean, anytime you're at this stage, any path is possible. But if you're talking about what are the top 5 scenarios that are going to result in a Notre Dame win, winning a shootout's at like the bottom of my list. And no matter how far you extend that list, whether it's 5, 7, 10, 12, winning a shootout's going to be at the bottom of my list as far as most likely scenarios in which Notre Dame wins this football game, which puts huge pressure on this Notre Dame defense to be at their best against the Buckeyes, which they have the last 2 years.
When I look at this matchup, like it's the indirect matchup that we've been talking a lot about in the playoffs, right? And you evaluate both defenses and what their job is. Both defenses have played at a level of consistency outside of one game this year that we talked about yesterday. But you go through and you look at what they've done best, and it's when they make offenses one-dimensional, right? They put them in a spot where they're just able to sit back, pin their ears back, their offense is playing well, and they're in obvious throwing situations. That's when Notre Dame's defense is feasted. That's when Ohio State's defense is feasted. And that's the importance of this matchup is, can Notre Dame's defense put Ohio State in a position where they're not able to run their entire offense? They put them in situations where, the game is in Will Howard's hands. He can't rely on Travion busting out a big 60-plus yard run because they just have their entire offensive playbook at their disposal, right? And so you have to do what you can to maximize your opportunity to win. That's not me calling Will Howard a bad player. From a football schematic standpoint, it's really hard to stop football teams when they can run the football. Case in point, Penn State in the first half, Penn State in the second half. Like that's what it comes down to, right? So there's a lot that we have to dive into here today, Bryan, and I'm excited to do it. But yes, Notre Dame's defense is going to have to do what they did all season outside of that one game to get them there, right? So it's going to be fun to talk about.
But if you can promise me 2 pick sixes, then I may feel better about their odds. If you can promise me a 98 and a 99 and a 100-yard pick six, then sure, okay, they can give up a lot of points and win the shootout. But the odds of that repeating themselves are not great in this matchup. So the other thing to kind of look at that, what makes this matchup interesting, Trevor, is the familiarity between these two teams.
Yeah.
Which up until 2 years ago, we would have said, well, there isn't any familiarity. I mean, look, I'm 46 years old, and in my lifetime, I've watched Notre Dame and Ohio State play twice in the 90s. I watched them play once in the 2000s. I watched them play one time in the 2010s, and that's it. That's all I ever saw. And because before the 1990s matchup, the last time they had played, I think was like in the 40s or 50s. It had been a long time. Well, now we're in a situation where they've played 3 years in a row. They had a home and home matchup in 2022 that Ohio State won 21-10. They had a at home in 2022, and then Ohio State won in comeback fashion last year, 17-14 in Notre Dame Stadium. We know how that game played out. They've been 2 competitive football games. And now you've got this Ohio State team who's playing Notre Dame in a different type of environment. And how is each team going to handle it? But the other part of this is that familiarity or of this matchup, because yes, Ohio State has a first-year coordinator in Chip Kelly, which makes that offense different. And so for Notre Dame, there is some not as familiar with how Chip Kelly calls the game, but the offense hasn't changed a whole lot, Trevor, this season from last season. There's things that Chip Kelly likes that maybe are different points of emphasis, but this is not an incredibly different offense from where it was the year before, but he's a much different play caller. So what I mean is the scheme is not hugely different. The emphasis and different things like that are different. And then from Ohio State, they're going to obviously now this is the third time they've had to game plan and study Al Golden. And we've seen Al Golden against other top offensive minds, have some up and down performances, obviously in 2022 against USC. Not that great, although I think schematically they did some good things in that game. But, you're missing some guys. You come out and you dominate USC the next year. And then this past year, you struggle at times against USC's offense. Does that mean anything? It could just be a coincidence. I don't know the answer to that question. So there's that side of which side of the ball can use that familiarity to their advantage in a matchup like this. And that's an interesting aspect of this battle too, Trev, is the personnel is not incredibly different. You have a new running back in the mix. You have a new quarterback, and you have a freshman receiver that looks a whole lot like the star All-American you had last year. down a tight end, down a couple linemen, So, I mean, there's some give and take it there. And same with Notre Dame. There's some new faces on this Notre Dame defense and some guys that were a part of this matchup the last 2 years. But overall, there's a lot of familiarity. And who benefits most from that is going to be a big part of, I think, how this particular matchup goes. It's a little different on the other side of the ball because Notre Dame's offense is a lot different than it was last year. Personnel-wise,
Right.
it's not even close to the same personnel. And schematically, it's not at all similar. This matchup, however, is a lot more similar, even though, like Notre Dame, Ohio State has a new offensive coordinator.
Yeah, you brought up the previous 2 games, and I think it is worth noting that Notre Dame didn't come out on top, but from Ohio State's perspective, Al Golden kind of got him 2 years in a row. If I'm just being honest, like you go through and you look at 2022, Notre Dame held Ohio State to its lowest total outpoint, tied with Northwestern at 21 points the entire season, postseason included. And in 2023, they were the lone defense that held them to their lowest offensive output of the season at 17 points. Outside of the bowl game, I'm using that one as an asterisk because, I mean, they were playing with half of a football team with how many people opted out and who did what. And Ohio State lost in the Cotton Bowl to Missouri 14-3. So, the way that I look at it is, Notre Dame in 2 years has shut down this, what has been perceived to be this, I can't even say perceived, like what is a high-powered offense in Ohio State, right? Like in 22, you had Stroud and you had Smith and Jigba, you had Harrison.
Although he did get hurt.
He did.
You still had those other guys, yeah.
Smith and Jigba got hurt. Still had a game plan for him, right? And
you still had Emeka. You still had Marvin Harrison Jr., who, remember preseason, Ohio State fans were telling us was going to be even better than Jackson Smith and Jigba. You still had Travion Henderson. You had Mayan Williams. So and here's the thing, as you said, you had C.J. Stroud.
Right. And then you have 2023 where, yes, it's a different look at quarterback, but Harrison Jr. came into his own. You still had Emeka Egbuka. You had Cade Stover at tight end. You still had Travion. You still had like Chip Trayanum and Quinshon Judkins essentially play the same role within that offense. I know there's some Ohio State fans that believe that Quinshon is, miles above what some other running backs are in the playoffs. I'm not under that impression. Brian, I know you aren't either. But Quinshon basically assumed the role of what Chip Trayanum did for that offense last year. He gets the tough yardage. He comes in goal line situations, and obviously is effective, right? I mean, he had 2 rushing touchdowns in the Cotton Bowl in the semifinals of the playoffs. So I'm not saying that he sucks. It's just that is who he is, right? And I'm starting to see some of the similar narratives this year, right? It was the same thing you heard in 22. It was the same thing we heard in 23 of good luck slowing down this offense with player A and player B and player C. And for all of these reasons, Ohio State is about to put up 38 points on this defense. And I do believe that history plays on the side of Notre Dame in this one, right? There's no reason for me to believe, not saying that it's not possible, but there's no reason for me to believe that Notre Dame having the same defensive coordinator on paper, we'll get into the injury discussion later, but on paper, what Notre Dame has done statistically has been relatively on par and or better in certain areas than what they did in 23. Notre Dame's not going to go from allowing 21 points to this Ohio State offense to 17 points to this Ohio State offense to 38 in the national championship.
You certainly hope not.
Right.
I mean, you certainly hope that doesn't happen. That is what I think a lot of people are expecting, though, Trevor. Looking at it from a national standpoint. And I don't know about maybe some don't think 38, but I do think there's a lot of people that think they're going to get to 27 to 31, and Notre Dame won't be able to score that much on the Ohio State defense, which is, I mean, I understand that. I'm not saying that it can't happen, but I'm saying I understand that. So let's kind of dive into this matchup, Trev. We're going to talk about what is similar and what is dissimilar from this offense compared to last year's offense, because you make great points. Like there's always the thought of, look, the more you play a team, the more chances are that there are that they can get you, right? And that's the danger of playing a team like this, is the more familiarity you have, the more they can start saying, well, hey, you know what? We did this late in the game and it really worked. We think we can carry that into this game because, they've been vulnerable to that. And that's both sides of the ball. I mean, I'm talking about this for the Notre Dame offense or defense against the Ohio State offense as well. Hey, we turned this up a little bit in the second or third quarter and, maybe we should do a little bit more of that, or, we saw this thing happen. And And those are all different aspects of this matchup. But it does come down to, you just got to keep doing what you've done the last 2 years. I mean, that's the reality of it. Is, in 2022, you basically said, hey, look, you've got to be able to stop the run, and you've got to make life tough for CJ Stroud. For the first 3 quarters, they did both of those things. I mean, CJ Stroud had like one easy pass the whole game. Everything else had to be like earned. I mean, he had to earn his money. He made some unbelievable throws in that game. I mean, Notre Dame was like, look, these windows are going to be super tight. So if you're going to complete balls on us, you're going to have to complete them in super tight windows outside of that one blown coverage, or not say blown coverage, terrible play call with the double safety blitz right after you just lost Tariq Bracy. But guess what CJ Stroud did? He made those throws. I mean, he went out and made those money throws. And then fourth quarter, the run game started to lean on Notre Dame, and that put the game away. And then last year, same thing. It's like had to make Kyle McCord work for it. And they did. They made him work for it big time. But then late in the game, they couldn't close the game out. Dropped interception, 10 guys in the field, a lot of different, yet 3rd and 19 that you allow them to convert because your safety does a poor job of squeezing on a seam route, literally backpedals into the end zone on 3rd and 19, which is still just unfathomable to me how you do that. But, Ohio State's guys made those plays, and Notre Dame's defense didn't make those plays. But you still held them to 17 points. But what was a big reason why they got to 17? 60-yard touchdown run. Like it was the same kind of recipe where Kyle McCord made the throws he needed to make, and the run game did enough to get them going. And Ohio State jumped out to what I think it was a 10-3 lead in that game after that long touchdown by it's a 10-0 lead against Notre Dame. And then of course Notre Dame scores the next 14 points. I don't know that you want to do that again in this game, Trev. I don't know that because I think this Ohio State defense is even better than last year's Ohio State defense. Now, I would argue that this Notre Dame offense is better than last year's Notre Dame offense, but that's a conversation we'll have more tomorrow. But you don't want to have those kind of mistakes. You've got to really to make those more plays. And the other thing too, Trevor, that you talk about the last couple of years is Notre Dame did some things against Ohio State last year that are uncharacteristic of this football team. And I think that's one of the things that hurt them in that game. And here's what I mean by that. The Notre Dame defense last year against Ohio State didn't force a turnover. That can't happen. They had opportunities. They dropped 2 interceptions in that game. One was a game's over if DJ Brown makes that play. I mean, it hits him right in the hands. Game's over. And, then there's another earlier in the game where, had a chance for a pick, didn't make a play on the ball, and didn't force any turnovers. Now, fortunately for you as Notre Dame, you didn't turn it over, but you've got to force turnovers. And this defense, even more so than last year's defense, is really good at forcing turnovers. And that's going to be a big part of this game. And when you look at Ohio State, they've done a much better job of protecting against turnovers this year. Not much better. They had 15 last year in 13 games. This year they've had they had 13 in 13 games last year. This year they've had 15 in 15 games. So they're about where they were last year. They don't turn the ball over a ton, but you've got to get the ball from them. They've turned the ball over 4 times in the last 4 games. Michigan, they turned it over twice and lost. Penn State, they turned it over twice and barely won. Oregon, they turned it over twice, barely won. That's the recipe for slowing down this offense. The other thing that Notre Dame did a bad job of last year in this matchup, Trevor, is they were not good on 3rd down against Ohio State. They went 10 of 17 against Ohio State. It was the only game all year they allowed a team to go over 50% on 3rd down. And fun fact, it was the last time a team went over 50% on Notre Dame. They haven't allowed that to happen all year. And this season, they've only allowed 2 teams to go over 40%. 40%. Louisville and USC. It just so happens that those 2 teams scored the most points against Notre Dame. So that's going to be another key part of it is you've got to play your game. If you play your game, you'll have chances because there's a lot of 3rd down and 4th down opportunities late in that game that would have been huge for Notre Dame if they could have converted them. So those are all different aspects of this matchup, Trev, that says, look, you have some familiarity now with them. You know who they are. They know who you are. How are you going to be able to do what you do and execute it at a high level, but then also who is able to find some things that maybe the other team isn't anticipating that can then go have some success. So there's this great chess match that I'm excited to see between Chip Kelly, Ryan Day, and that offensive staff, Al Gold, Mike Mickens, and the defensive staff, that I think is going to play a huge role in this game, because these are two talented units. There's no question about it. But the coaching matchup is going to be every bit as big as the one that happens on the field, in my opinion.
Yeah, the coaching chess match is going to be fantastic. And I feel like we've been saying that a lot with Al Golden this year, but I think it just goes to show how many great coordinators Notre Dame has faced this year. You know what I mean? I mean, he went up against Andy Kotelnicki at Penn State. He went up against, Shanahan at IU. He went up against Mike Bobo at Georgia. He went up against
Lincoln Riley.
He went up against Lincoln Riley. The name
Jeff
of it,
Brom.
Jeff Brom. Thank you. Yep, he went up against Jeff Brom. And so, I mean, honestly,
Colin
week one,
Klein,
I was just about to say.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
This is why
No, you're good. No, you're good. His name was escaping me for a second, but no, week one, start of the season, he's going up against Colin Klein, who's a great offensive mind, who did fantastic things at Kansas State.
And had to face two triple option teams that were pretty dynamic this year as well, in the middle of all that. Yeah.
Had to face two triple option teams in the middle of it that ran two different styles of the triple option, right? So it's not even like it was just copy paste from back in the day, like when the same seasons they would play Navy and Air Force and it looked very similar. Like it was triple option, yes, but in different ways and different styles. And so once again, he has a fantastic challenge and opportunity in front of him to go up against Chip Kelly, who has been one of the better offensive minds in college football this year. And obviously a lot of noise came in with his hiring, and, you're bringing in people here. Chip Kelly immediately associate that with the 2011, 2012 Oregon teams, right? Rightfully so. I get it. So you pair that with the amount of talent that Ohio State has on offense, it's going to make for a really, really fun matchup. To me, it's going to come down to which defense and which team really overall, and this will be a common theme for me over the next couple of days, is which team wins the big moments. Notre Dame last year didn't win the big moments. They didn't get the stop on 3rd and 19. They didn't get the stop on 4th and 7. They didn't get the game-ending interception. You look at what Notre Dame's defense opportunities that they had the last couple of years they played Ohio State, especially last year. Ohio State won that game despite them being outplayed for the majority of that game by Notre Dame. They won the big moments and when it mattered. And you look at a game with the magnitude of a national championship, when the teams are this good and players are evenly matched and the coordinator battle on either side is going to be definitely a fun one to watch. To me, the winner of these games comes down to who wins the biggest moments. You go back through and look at other national championship winners. In 2016, it was, Clemson and Deshaun Watson winning that big moment. And in the following year, it was Tua coming in and throwing a game-winning touchdown to Devontae Smith in overtime. And so you look at that, and when you're not talking about the teams like the 2018 Clemsons, the 2019 LSUs of the world, when teams are evenly matched, it comes down to who wins the big moments. And Notre Dame is going to have to capitalize on the opportunities that they didn't capitalize on last year, which includes situational football. Like you talked about, 3rd down, winning in the red zone is going to be huge. Will Howard, and we'll talk about this later in the show, but Will Howard does put the ball in danger. There's a reason why he has 20 interceptions over the last 2 seasons. There's a reason why he's thrown 2 interceptions in 3 playoff games. Like he puts the ball in harm's way. The defense has to be able to capitalize on those opportunities like they've done all year. So it's going to be fun, man. It's winning key moments for me is going to be huge.
So, Trev, that gives us a little bit of an overview of this matchup. We're going to dive more into specifics of the Ohio State offense next. We're going to talk about just kind of a season overview of them, because it's been a little bit of an up and down year for them. There's been times when that offense has been really good and at times when that offense has struggled, and we're going to break that down. Talk about areas where Notre Dame matches up well against Ohio State, areas where maybe there's some concerns about this matchup. And then after that, we'll do a sort of a stacking up. We'll go run game versus run defense, pass game versus pass defense, and go forth in situational football. We'll break that part down. And then the final part of this breakdown, Trev, is going to look at the matchups that matter most. We have our eyes on kind of 3 matchups. They're more broad matchups, but we'll also get into some details on those matchups that are going to be very important for Notre Dame to win those matchups if they're going to be able to slow down this Ohio State offense. Because that's really what it's down to for both teams. I don't know that either team's defense is so good that they're just going to completely shut down the other team's offense for 4 quarters. And people talk about, Notre Dame did this against Ohio, Indiana, and they did this against Georgia. And what people have to remind themselves of is go watch Mike Denbrock's play calling after they got big leads in both of those games. It was, look, we believe in our defense. They're not going to score enough to come back in this football game. We're not going to do something to put them in position to be able to make a play to come back in this game, which is why we saw the offense kind of get that lead and then just kind of coast. I don't know that you can do that against this offense, because I'd say this is probably the first offense they've played that could probably score twice quickly to get back in this game. And so they have to be prepared for that. But, that's what we've seen a little bit. So we're going to dive into that matchup, Trev, here next. But before we do, folks, do us a favor, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. We would greatly appreciate that. And as always, make sure that you are signed up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Trev, let's dive into the Ohio State offense, and let's really break down this Buckeye offense. You and I have watched a lot of film. I know I was like Christmas yesterday when I was like, hey, Trev, go check your email. And there's just like all 22 breakdowns of Ohio State. And so we've dove into a lot of the film, and you come away with a lot of different aspects, which is, man, there's times when you're watching this offense where you're like, this is a really good offense. Like, man, this thing is clicking. Man, this offense is dangerous. Man, this team. Because I like good football, Trev, and even sometimes like I'll find myself like, oh, I shouldn't be enjoying this because Notre Dame's got to play this team. You know what I mean? Like, I should not be enjoying this game right now because they're gonna have to find a way to have answers of this. But you just appreciate good football, and when this offense is rolling, it's good football. I mean, and it's not just because they have good players either. They do some really good things scheme wise at times that you really like. So we're going to dive into this offense, and we're going to first take a little bit of an overview of what the season has been like for them. And when you talk about, I remember being on the show with Bill Bender going into that Oregon game, and there was a talk at the time that this is the best team in college football. This Buckeye team is the best team in college football right now. Their defense was playing lights out. They had only, in those first 5 games, they played Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall, Michigan State, and Iowa. The closest game they had was a 28-point win over Iowa, who's a decent team this year. It's a solid football team with a good defense. Not as good as their defense was last year, but it's still a very good defense. And you're like, they haven't played any close games this year. I mean, it's kind of, this is just a good football team. And they're just rolling on people offensively, running the ball, throwing the ball, having a lot of success. And it was kind of like, hey, this is why we said they were going to be good. You look at their defense in the first 5 games. They'd only given up 34 points in 5 games. Gave up 6 to Akron, 7 to Michigan State, 7 to Iowa, and then Marshall scored a whopping 14 points against them, and they shut down Western Michigan's offense, which has been pretty good. And there's a lot of people saying, boy, this offense is really, really dynamic. And then the next 3 games kind of happen. And against Oregon, they put up numbers against Oregon, but you also saw some of the holes from this offense in that game. And what I mean by that, Trev, is you started to see a little bit of, they could have some bad turnovers. They could struggle running the football at times. And that was really, I'd say part of the you kind of had some, you looked at the offense and you said, boy, this running game has been really good so far. They've ran the ball 273 on Western Michigan, 280 on Marshall, 185 over Michigan State, 203 against Iowa. I think that's run game's pretty good. Hasn't been the same since then. And the highest, so like 170 was their lowest output in the first 5 games. Then they went for 273, 280, 185, 203. Since that time, and it began with Oregon, the highest output they've had in the game is 181 against Oregon. And then they've had 3 games in the 170s. And since then, they've had 3 games with under 100, including their most recent game. You started to see some of the warts of this offense as well. And every team has them. Notre Dame has them. Notre Dame's are in a different area. They're more throwing the football than they are running the football. But every team has them, and they struggled to run the ball in that game. I think of the 4th and 1 conversion that a 4th and 1 opportunity they had where Quinshon Judkins gets the ball, he gets in the hole, just gets stoned. You know what I mean? Like they just had some of those issues. The offensive line started to have some issues because of it wasn't playing great, but it also started getting banged up. It's a lot like what Notre Dame went through. It wasn't playing great early in the season, but it was doing what it needed to do to put up big numbers. And then it starts to get banged up. And played a big role. I'm watching the Nebraska game, and Nebraska's offensive line or defensive line ate Ohio State's offensive line up. And that came the week after, or I should say the game after. It was actually at a bye week. Is the game after they lost to Oregon, where they had opportunities offensively to take advantage, and they couldn't do that. And they struggled against Nebraska. And then you go look at it, and you're like, well, the guy that started at left tackle in that game, I don't even think he's on the roster anymore because he entered the transfer portal. He's already picked another school, I believe. And, Josh Simmons didn't play a whole lot of football. I was going over the snap counts today. I put that on the message board, the snap counts for both teams. And Josh Simmons played like 300-some snaps all year because he got banged up in the Oregon game. And he was never fully healthy since then. And he's out now. Seth McLaughlin is out now. They had some other injuries on the offensive line. It was just a banged-up unit. Struggled against Penn State until late in the Penn State game, Trevor. I think that's when the offense got back on track, started to run the football, and you're thinking, okay, now they're going to be really dangerous. And it just never really materialized that way. And, so they've had to rely a lot on Will Howard. They really have. Now, against Tennessee and Oregon, you started to see them run the ball more effectively. They only ran for $156 against Tennessee, but you and I talked yesterday, Trev. They wanted to run for more yards against Tennessee. They could have. They could have gone for over 200 if they wanted. Easily. And same thing against Oregon. If they wanted to, they could have ran the football a lot more from a volume standpoint. And then against Texas, they struggled to run the football. And that's been their story all year. It's the up and down performance of the line and the up and down performance of the run game that, to me, has really kind of made for a very up and down performance from this offense, to the point where when they're on, they're as fun to watch as any offense in college football. Schematically, they're fun to watch. Personnel-wise, they're fun to watch. You're just like, dude, forget who my team is or who I cover. I'm a football fan. I love football, and I'm an offensive guy. I love good offensive football. There's times I'm watching the Buckeyes this year where I'm like, that's just a thing of beauty. Just the whole operation, how they motion, how they shift, how they do different things to get personnel matchups that I like. They never just like, it's never like Benjamin Morrison against Marvin Harrison. It's like last year. It's like he's going to move all around. Jeremiah Smith moves all around. They do a lot of things where you're like, man, that's good football. And then there's other times you're like, is this the same team that I just watched a week ago? They don't look like the same team that I watched a week ago. And that's what's made it kind of challenged to really evaluate this football team from Ohio State, because on offense, because you never quite know what you're going to get from them offensively. And that's, exactly what you're going to get from both of these defenses. Both of these offenses don't always look the same from week to week. And that's what makes a very intriguing matchup here, Trev.
Well, we all talked about it before the Cotton Bowl, and just full transparency, I said this, and I've been quoted at saying this, that I felt a lot better at Notre Dame's chances of winning a national championship based on the performance that Ohio State's offense had in the Cotton Bowl, right? If they went out and their offense looked like what it did against Tennessee and against Oregon, they did that against Texas. You know what I mean? It would have been like okay. Now the order just got a little bit taller for Notre Dame's defense to try to contain this offense, right? But, you go back through and you look at the regular season and their path to get here, and just all of it almost feels like, they'll stack 3 or 4 games of good offense together, and then it just falls off. Like, it's not like it goes up 3-4 and then it kind of starts a plateau. Like, it will then go backwards, which is really weird, because we talk so much about Notre Dame being a rhythm-based team, and when they're clicking, they're clicking. And when they're not, like, I don't want to say that their offense is like bad, you know what I mean? But it's
just not super dynamic, super explosive. You think of the Indiana game, 27 points, the Georgia game, 23 points, although they could have scored more on offense if they needed to, but the kick return was like just coast. Penn State, 27 points. But you're saying, Trev, like they don't have the 10.
Right.
Like they had against Michigan.
Right. Like the disparity is not, you're putting up, it was a combined team 38 points, but in some games you watch Ohio State put up 38 on Indiana, which I know we're going to dive into that matchup here too. Yeah, they're not putting up 50 some odd points, but then when they're not on, they're scoring 17. They're scoring 10. Like the disparity for Notre Dame's offense is not that big of a margin, and so that's what's been really interesting about diving into some of the film with Ohio State's offense. Because Bryan, you're 100% right. It's when they're on, it's a thing of beauty, and it's awesome to watch what they do to put people. I mean, I don't know if I've seen a coordinator move their wide receivers, especially Smith and Igbuka, around as much as what Chip Kelly does. I mean, they're motioning Igbuka into the backfield so Quinshawn can lead block for him. They're running Jeremiah on jet sweeps. They're doing so many different things to get the ball into the hands of their playmakers and get them to the perimeter. And when it's on, it's creative and it's awesome to watch. When it is not, you kind of throw your hands up in the air and it's just like you go from who can stop this offense to who couldn't stop this offense. You know what I mean? And so it's a really interesting dynamic for this Ohio State team, and thankfully their defense has been as consistent as it has been. Same thing for Notre Dame. Thank goodness Notre Dame, outside of one game, thank goodness Notre Dame's defense has been what it has been all year, or else Notre Dame fans would be living and dying with their offense. You know what I mean? So, yeah, defense has been the story for both.
So, Trev, let's talk about the Ohio State offense and what we expect to see. One thing that I want to talk first about that we haven't seen a lot from them that I do think we'll see at times against Notre Dame is pushing the pace. They have not been a team this year that pushed the pace a lot. I've seen different reasons as to why and those type of things, but they do when they need to. I think Chip Kelly ultimately likes being a tempo guy. I can understand when you're playing a 16, maybe 17 game season, why maybe you don't want to do that 12 games in the regular season. But when you watch what Penn State did to Notre Dame last week, when Penn State pushed the tempo, they moved the ball on Notre Dame, especially in the first half. But even in the second half, they went a little bit up tempo on their drive that tied the game at 17. And I don't know that Ohio State wants to do this for 4 quarters because their depth is not great either, especially on the offensive line. Notre Dame's defense still has more depth than Ohio State's offense as far as guys that play a lot of football and are like that have played the snaps coming into this game to be prepared to play this game. And so I don't know that you want to do that for 4 quarters, but I have a hard time thinking that Chip Kelly of all people is not going to push the tempo in this game after what he saw USC do at times to Notre Dame and then also what he saw Penn State do at times. Now, they're not the only 2 teams that have pushed the tempo against Notre Dame. Other teams have tried and it didn't work. But those are 2 of the better teams they face and 2 teams that are a little bit more similar to what Ohio State does philosophically and schematically. So I think that's one thing that we'll get into kind of what they actually do. This is one thing I think Notre Dame needs to have a plan for, even though there's not a lot of film that makes you think they should have a giant plan for, or whatever the case may be. And that's a big part of, like, defenses have calls that any team that's playing an up-tempo team, you have certain calls. And there's just, hey, if they go 3-by-1, the safety and the linebacker make calls. This is what we do when they go 3-by-1 or 2-by-2. And there's different calls for each one. And you got to just make it. And then if the team goes slower and they look to the sideline, then you now look to the sideline. But there's calls you just automatically make from the player level when a team is going tempo. And I think that's something that helped Notre Dame last week. You could see them when Penn State was going tempo in the second half. You could see Drake Bone and Xavier Watson and Don Schuler just immediately barking out play calls. And then that helped them be more effective. I don't know that they were as prepared for Penn State's tempo last week. I think they're going to hopefully be better prepared for that this week and have a plan for that this week. And hopefully Ohio State doesn't catch them off guard the way that Penn State caught them off guard last week with that tempo. But I do think that right there is something we needed to discuss at the beginning, even though it's not something that's been a staple of the Ohio State offense this year, the way it has been for Chip Kelly in the past.
Georgia's offense also had a little bit of success with it as well. Now, obviously, not as much as what Penn State's did, not as much from a points perspective as what USC did. But when Georgia needed to move the ball on Notre Dame, they also went tempo as well. So, now there's no more, well, we have to be rested for the next game. Like, this is it, right? And so I'm expecting both coordinators to pull out all the stops. Notre Dame's a defense that likes to substitute a good amount, especially in the front 7. They'll run on Jalen Sneed and Jaden Ausberry. They'll rotate their tackles. They'll have their NASCAR package of edge rushers where, Bryce Young and Junior Tuialamaka will come on to replace RJ Oben or Josh Burnham. So when teams go tempo, they put Notre Dame into some tight spots in that because Notre Dame's defense, I'm not going to say like relies heavily on personnel groupings, but I would rather have a Junior Tuialamaka and a Bryce Young rushing off the edge in a 3rd and 7 than I would a Josh Burnham and an RJ Oben. That's different skill sets, right? So when teams have gone tempo with Notre Dame, I think that's why they've had some success. right? They haven't been able to get the play calls into your point. But I also do think that they're catching them in a personnel grouping that's not fit for that down and situation, because Notre Dame has been very good at kind of those almost hockey-like substitutions on second and third down to put them into favorable matchups. So, yeah, I agree. I think you could see a good amount of that from Ohio State as well.
So let's get into what we do know about Ohio State, and we're going to start with the run game. And I think this has been part of the issue that Ohio State has had this year is, number one, they have talented backs. I've made my opinion of Quinshon Judkins known, but that's in relation to saying I don't think he's an elite back like they can make him out to be.
Yeah.
This is still a kid who, if he gets I think he needs like 30, 40, 50 yards to get to 1,000 this season. Let's see, he's at 960s. He needs 40 yards to get to 1,000. This will be a 16th game. Yeah, I know, and he's splitting carries with another guy who's even closer to 1,000 yards than he is, because Travion's only 33 yards away from 1,000. This will be Quinshon's I think third season of over 1,000 yards in college football. I mean, this is a guy that's been productive. He's got well over 3,000 yards of rushing in 3 years in college football. So he's still a good back. And you and I have been saying for a while now that when Ohio State's offense is rolling, Travion Henderson's a big part of what they do. But my issue has been, number one, inconsistency on the offensive line, similar to what Notre Dame's gone through this year. Just haven't been able to put the same lineup in there week after week after week. And the other part of it is I feel like they run they're not a team that is really good at running right at you. They do a lot of running misdirection, counters, wraps, traps. They run a lot of outside zone, a lot of stretch, a lot of toss plays, a lot of jet sweeps. And that can work against a lot of teams. But when you play teams that have some speed on defense or some teams that have plans and they shut that stuff down, they haven't been able to really go right at teams effectively running the ball. When they have had success up the middle, it's when they're having success on the outside stuff, teams start over pursuing, and they hit those cutback lanes for big plays. One thing that Notre Dame did a good job last year is, outside of one carry, they did a very good job of shutting down the run game. And so I think that's an interesting aspect to this, Trev. And we'll get more into the numbers later, but Notre Dame is going to have to handle that part of the run game, because Texas, I thought, was pretty good at defending the perimeter run and forcing everything back inside where they had help. Notre Dame hasn't been as good defending perimeter run this season. We've talked about this a lot. I mean, going all the way back to Miami of Ohio and Northern Illinois, especially Miami of Ohio, though. But then Louisville did it. And Florida State had a couple snaps of it. USC had a couple snaps of it. Penn State made their living running off tackle. Like I see a lot of Penn State people say, no, Penn State dominated Notre Dame up front. I'm like, no, they definitely won that matchup, but a big part of that was they were trying to go laterally. They were not running right at Notre Dame very often. They were trying to get to the perimeter of the defense with their stretch, their quick pitch and toss, their jet sweeps and things like that. It was to get outside of the linebackers and stretch the linebackers to keep Notre Dame's linebackers from coming downhill. And when the second half, Notre Dame found ways to still do that. So what Notre Dame did in the second half, one of the things they did, Trevor, is the defensive ends did a much better job of pushing back while getting stretched, which forced things back inside. And their linebackers, instead of kind of just scraping and then taking contact from the guards, just flew downhill and blew up blockers. And then they allowed the safeties, and if somebody could get off of a block, you go make that play. So they had some adjustments. They're going to need to execute those adjustments much more effectively and early against Ohio State. And also the thing about running that type of stretch that was effective against Notre Dame is their backs have great vision at Penn State. And they would just stretch. And then as soon as they saw a crease, they would hit that crease. Well, I think Travion Henderson is very similarly built as those backs, where he can stretch, and then see that crease, have that vision to hit that crease and go. And so that's something that Notre Dame is going to have to be really good at, because as we saw last year, you can shut them down, 60, score. And that's the challenge that the run game has. But it's really going to come down to your defensive line is just going to have to be more physical than the Ohio State offensive line. This is actually a big offensive line, Trevor, but they remind me a lot of USC in that they haven't been an overly physical offensive line for much of the year. The one exception being that last drive against Penn State. mean, they just ran right at Penn State, and Penn State couldn't do a darn thing about it. So they've had some capability of doing that. But when you look at their offensive line, left to right, Donovan Jackson is now left tackle. He was an All-American guard, but he's been forced to play left tackle multiple times this season. He's 6'4", 320. Luke Montgomery, 6'5", 308. He's at left guard. Carson Hinsman, 6'5", 300. He's their small guy. Their right guard, Tegra Shabola, is 6'3", 27. And then their right tackle, Josh Fryer, 6'5", 320. They also play Austin Sareveld a lot. Notre Dame fans should remember him. Notre Dame recruited him out of high school. He rotates a lot with Shabola and also at times Luke Montgomery. And he's 6'5", 320. So this is a big offensive line, Trev. And you worry about if they kind of say, hey, we're going to go right at you. You do worry about that size advantage that they're going to have on Notre Dame. But that's not who they've been so far this season. But they're not super athletic on the right side of the line. And that's something that Notre Dame needs to be able to take advantage of. They're much more athletic on the left side of the line. But it's really going to come down to that battle, as far as what they're going to do. Ohio State's going to do things to try to create run lanes for your backs with the stretch, with the pitches. They're going to try to do things to mess with the eye discipline of the linebackers, the jets, the shovels, the screens, the motions, all that, the smokes on run plays. They'll just run inside zone and just smoke a reverse. And you got to think of, because it's a Mecca Buka, you got to kind of like, got to think about that one for a second. All those things, when they're on, that's what makes this run game dangerous. When it's on and well designed and the offensive line is rolling, that's what makes it dangerous, on top of the fact that they have very talented running backs.
I think they also do a really good job of rotating their running backs as well. I do think that it is interesting that like Travion Henderson almost exclusively just doesn't play in the first quarter. I think that's really interesting. Like I don't really know what the reason for it is. And like
I think I know. No, I'm serious. I think I know. Like I'm not joking with you. I think it's meant to wear a team down early with the big physical back. Travion is just, because the injury, is not a bulk guy. Yeah. So the more you use him early, the less you're going to have him fresh in the fourth quarter. So I think, hammer. He comes in late first or in the second quarter, and all of a sudden you've kind of played 20 snaps already and you're a little bit worn down, and then boom, that speed burst comes at you.
Makes sense.
Know what I mean? And then he can kind of put a game away late with that speed because he's fresh. He's on 6, 7, 8 carries. Now all of a sudden you've got 60 snaps under your belt, and Travion's got 15. And that stretch play he's running, it's running a little bit more juice than maybe it would have if he had 30 more snaps under his belt. No, I honestly think that's why. I think that's a big, because he has proven that, look, a heavy workload, he's going to break down. He just hasn't been able to be a heavy workload guy because the injuries have just really kind of taken their toll on him in that regard. And that's why I think getting Quinshon Judkins did make a lot of sense. Yeah. Because he can be the volume guy, the hammer. Because you look at it, Travion's their leading rusher this season. He's got 967 yards. Quinshon's right behind him at 960. But Quinshon has 51 more carries than Travion. And I think that's the reason why, Trev. So I'm being honest. Like, I'm not busting balls. I really think that's the reason why. And Lou Holtz used to do this with Rocket Ismail in 1990, 89 to 90. He'd hammer the Anthony Johnson and Rodney Culver and Ricky Waters, and then he'd bring in Rocket in the second half and run tall sweep to him. And you're just like, that you have to face that after getting hammered by Ricky Waters and Anthony Johnson and Rodney Culver all game? Really? Right. So I do think that's the reason why we see them get him in the game a little bit later than normal. So please continue.
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, but their balance of carries is something that I've kept an eye on. And it speaks to what you said about their actual usage. I mean, the most carries Travion Henderson has had in a game this season is 11. But then, like, the least amount is 6. So it's not like there's some games where it's like, hey, we're feeding the hot hand. They have a clear-cut idea of, hey, Travion, this is just what you're doing today. Travion Henderson doesn't have a single game over 100 yards, but he averages 7.3 yards per carry on the season, right? He has 10 rushing touchdowns. I don't know if any of them – I'll have to go back and look. I don't know if any of them came in the red zone. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it just feels like every single time that kid touches the football, it could go. Right. But then you go back and you look at a guy like Quinshon Judkins, and he has more carries added up over the season, but it's not like in games Quinshon has 19 and Travion has his, 8 to 10. Quinshon has 50 more carries spread out over 15 games, but because he's getting like 3 more a game. You know what I mean? Like The most carries Quinshon had in a game was against Oregon, and he had 17. Outside of that, he lived in that range of like 11 to 15,
Yeah.
somewhere in that sweet spot.
Since Marshall, he's had 10 twice, 11 three times, 12 in another, 13 in another, several with 14, one with 15, and then as you mentioned, the Oregon game was his most with 17.
Yeah. Yeah. But they're used very differently, right? I mean, some of the things some of the best stuff, in my opinion, that Quinshon Judkins has done this season has been as a blocker. Honestly, like has been as a lead blocker. Like I said, there was a play they had against Oregon the first time where they motioned Igbuka into the backfield, and they had almost just like that Will Howard was in the pistol and had Quinshon Judkins behind him and Igbuka to his left. And they pulled their left guard and they just immediately sent Travion out to be a lead blocker and then just ran it like a zone read to Igbuka, and it got like 9 yards. So you saw that he had that. They ran 12 person, or sorry, I'm getting my numbers mixed up here. Either way, they had a play against Texas where they had Travion and Quinshon on the field at the same time.
21 person.
21, thank you. And they treated Quinshon as a lead blocker. And so I think that's honestly sometimes where he's been at his best, similar on the goal line. They'll use Quinshon as a lead blocker for Will Howard, who has 7 rushing touchdowns this season, similar to what they'll ask Jeremiah Love to do for Riley Leonard on occasion. So, you know, I like their usage of their backs. They find very different ways to get them involved. And again, the thing that kind of gives me a little bit of pause with this is they're two very different styles of runners. And we saw that against Penn State. Katron Allen came in and he was the hammer. And then Nicholas Singleton came in and he was the guy that had a lot of success on the perimeter. And I'm going to be interested to see how Notre Dame's defense adjusts to that speed difference, right? I mean, you can catch Quinshon on if he runs a stretch play. But it's different when number 32 enters the backfield and he's turning the corner right when you're getting to like the top of your angle to pursuit, right? So it's going to be that one's going to be one that I'm going to be keeping a strong eye on, because I think that change of speed messed with Notre Dame a little bit when they played Penn State. I really do, because you could tell a difference in how they attack the runners between Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, in my opinion.
What are your thoughts on this, Trev? An observation that I had, and I'm curious if you feel the same way. One of the things that I look at schematically between Penn State and Ohio State, it's actually not a ton of difference run game scheme. You know, the Penn State's always done the jet sweeps with their running back. They run the stretch, they run misdirection. I don't even call it misdirection. It's just like it's gap schemes. They run a lot of gap schemes, things like that. The thing that I notice on film is just Penn State's a lot more physical in how they go about those things. Like their offensive line just does it in a way where it's just a little bit more physical. And I don't think Ohio State's been as fit. This is not that lazy, like, oh, they're soft football. That's not what I'm talking about. It's a different style of going about attacking the other team. And I'm curious how Notre Dame handles that, or if Ohio State maybe tries to ramp that up a little bit. But, you know, we saw that a little bit last year too, where when they got in short yardage situations, Notre Dame defense shut them down because they're just not used to going vertical. They're used to doing so much of the gap, the pin and pull, and the stretch stuff. And I think that's going to have to continue for Notre Dame. Is they're going to have to make sure that Ohio State can't run right at them. But also you wonder, can they get the same type of push on the edge against Notre Dame that Penn State did? That's an interesting part too, because they're similar in size. I just think the Penn State offensive line is just in general just more physical in how they block and how they play. Do you see it that way, or do you see it a little bit different?
No, we see it the same. I mean, I think it's just a difference in philosophies. Again, I'm with you. I don't think that it's Ohio State doesn't like contact or not physical. I'm not saying that at all. They're playing in the national championship for a reason, right? But I think for Penn State, it's more of they use their offensive line to pave the way, I guess, like is how I look at it. Ohio State's offensive line is more used to, because they have an explosive guy like Travion, and Quinshon is a hard runner. I think it's very similar to like Notre Dame's philosophy at times, where it's like, hey, get a body on a if Travion finds a crease, he could at least take it for 15, 20. But for Penn State's, it's very much like we're meant to pave the way. We're immediately moving up to the second level. We're blocking downfield. Like it's more of that, in my opinion. So I'm with you.
Let's talk about their pass game a little bit, Trev. And this is what the danger zone is for Notre Dame. is their pass offense against Notre Dame pass defense. Now, on papers, we'll break down here in a little bit. This is really good elite on really good.
Yeah.
Talent wise, it's in my opinion elite on elite. It's a great matchup. But when their pass game is on, it is fun. This is the part I like to watch when it's on. And so we're going to break it down from a standpoint of what it looks like when it's on. What are the things they do when they're on? And I think the first thing is when Chip Kelly's really in his bag, they do three things that you're going to see a lot of. Number one, they do a really nice job of moving their personnel around in order to get matchups they like. You're not just going to see Jeremiah Smith lined up in the boundary against Leonard Moore all day. They're going to say, we want to see him against number 29. We want to see him against number 1. And if we catch Notre Dame in 4-3 personnel, then you better darn well believe you're going to have him in one of the slot positions going against either a safety or a linebacker. There's no question about it. They do when they're on, they do a really nice job of moving around their personnel. They do some nice stack stuff with their personnel. And this isn't just, okay, he's X, he's Z, he's the F, whatever. It's also they'll do stack things. They'll post-snap switch it, so they'll start Jeremiah off on the outside. Like the touchdown pass he had against Nebraska, they were in sort of a reduced alignment. And at the snap, he goes right inside, and then the slot guy comes right outside of him. And next thing you know, he's now on a safety, or the corner has to squeeze, and now your safety has to go over top, or a linebacker has to go over top to cover the slot receiver, or sometimes they'll do it with a running back or a tight end. And that's a tough matchup. That's a tough thing to do the way that Ohio State does it. So they can get real creative with their how they move their personnel around, with how they use motions and shifts. They'll do things to get, they'll get a Mecca on just a jet sweep action, play action pass. You drop 7, seeing pass, and then you forget about a Mecca down there and a little check down, and then boom, next thing you know, he's running for 8 yards before anybody gets close to him. They'll do a lot. They do a lot of checking down. They do a lot of swing check downs with their backs. If nobody comes, you're going to get it out in coverage. And if a team is a heavy blitz team, they will get real creative with how they use their backs and tight ends to try to create some big play opportunities. Those are things that I like a lot from their offense, Trevor. And also, they run a lot of play action.
Yeah.
Now, it's easier to do play action from gun, and Notre Dame does like a lot of those flash fakes, but I'm talking about like literal, like they write. I'd say this: Will Howard does a better job of writing his play action fakes to make them look like runs than Riley Leonard does. It's Riley's not great at selling run when it's a play action pass. I'll just be honest about that. Will Howard's better about that. They do a lot of play action pass, which does a couple things. Number one, obviously it's a different type of protection in play action. You're going to get, sometimes they'll keep their tight end in a lot to block in those situations and then leak him in the running back if nobody comes. But then also what it does by running play action, it gives them, 6-7 man protections if they need it, which lets them get some of their deep overs, their deep go routes, their double moves going on the outside. If your linebackers come down hard, they'll run a lot of quick slants, a lot of crossers right behind it, which force your safeties to have to come flying down. They got a really nice play action game too, Trev. Those things right there, the movement and the matchups and then the play action, those are the three things that really stand out when they're in there, when they're really on their game in the pass game. Those things are just the bread and butter of what they're going to try to do, just philosophically. We'll get into some scheme stuff here in a second, but just philosophically.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I can really appreciate from Ohio State's offense this year is they found ways to win this is a very despairing win, but when teams have been able to find ways to contain or slow down Jeremiah Smith, which is something that this offense has not been able to do in previous years. Right? Everybody talks about the Ohio State-Georgia game and how it was a shootout, but what was the resounding answer? Which there is some truth to this, but what was the resounding answer for why Ohio State lost that game to Georgia? It's because Marvin Harrison Jr. got knocked out of the game, forgetting that they still had Emeka Egbuka and Cade Stover and all these guys that are still playmakers, right? This season, I believe that I think they've done a much better job at like distributing the ball a little bit more this year, in my opinion. You look in the biggest storyline was, Jeremiah Smith held to 1 catch for 3 yards against Texas. And it's like, yeah. And Carnell Tate stepped up and he had 87 receiving yards, and Emeka Egbuka had 5 receptions for over 50. And so I think they've done a little bit better job this year of distributing. I really do. Because in previous years, like it was that like Ohio State's offense struggled last year because Marvin Harrison Jr. was held to 3 catches for 33 yards. And like that was the big thing. It's like, well, if Marvin got going, then this game wouldn't have been over. This game would have been over. It's like, yeah, but he didn't. Right. Egbuka still had, I think he had like 9 catches for 91 yards, but I'm almost positive that like 40 or 50 of that came on that final drive that they went on, because almost every third down completion went to Egbuka, including a 3rd and 19. So, I believe that they've done a much better job at distributing the football this year. They're finding different ways to get their playmakers involved. So, yeah, I mean, their pass game's legit.
I think another thing that's a little bit different this year from their pass game too, Trevor, is their number 3 option is different this year. Last year, their number 3 option was a tight end. You could even argue, at times he was number 2 when Emeka was out. Their number 3 receiver last year was Julian Fleming, who just doesn't scare you. I mean, he made a huge 4th down play against Notre Dame, right? I mean, it was a huge play, great catch. But what I mean scare you is he's not a guy that's going to take over a game. One thing that I believe makes this pass offense better than last year's, and the statistics are no different. I mean, in fact, just from a pure number standpoint, they're throwing for fewer yards per game this year than they did last year. The difference is they're up by about half a yard per attempt this year compared to last year. And last year's offense was actually a little higher in yards per catch. There's some reasons for that. But what makes it when the pass offense is on this year is their number 3 option now is a legitimate, talented wide receiver in Cardinal Tate. And, you hear these hyperbolic comments when people talk about how talented a room is. Well, this guy would, their number 4 guy would start on, or number 3 guy would start on, every team they play on and be their number 1. And you're like, okay. And then we say it about the Notre Dame running backs, and you're like, yeah, it's actually factual. Well, I think that's also true about the Ohio State pass corps. Cardinal Tate would probably be Notre Dame's best receiver if he played Notre Dame. Maybe second best if everything was clicking the way it should be. He would be the number 1, at worst number 2 for, I'd say, 90% of the teams that Ohio State played this year. A couple of their playoff teams that's not true of. It's not true of Oregon. He'd be really good, but Tez Johnson's still their number 1. It probably isn't true of Texas. I think Matthew Golden, the way he played this year, is their number 1. It would have been true, I think, of Ohio State. I mean, Tennessee. It would certainly be true of Michigan. It'd be certainly true of Penn State if we're talking just receivers. So, and I think it's arguable that it would be true for Notre Dame as well. So that is something that I think makes this a different matchup than it was a year ago. Some ways I like that matchup better for Notre Dame in certain situations because a tight end is going to present a different matchup. And in other ways, it concerns me a little bit more. And we saw in some of the playoff games this year, including the Texas game, that look, you can take him out of the game. You can take Jeremiah Smith out of the game, and we'll get to Jeremiah here in a few, but you can take him out of the game, but and you could even slow down Emeka Egbuka, which Texas did. They not only slowed down Emeka Egbuka, they slowed down, Jeremiah Smith, but they slowed down Emeka Egbuka as well. He didn't go off and have the big game that he normally has when teams are focusing all their coverage on Jeremiah Smith. Emeka had 5 catches for 51 yards. So what was the difference? Travion Henderson had a 75-yard catch and run on the screen, and Cardinal Tate had a big game. Okay, you want to leave me in one-on-one coverage? Cool. Against your second or third best cover guy? Okay, I'm going to win that battle. Personnel-wise, that makes them a challenging matchup. To your point, and you've made that point now a couple times last couple of days, Trevor. That's what makes, when they're on, that's what makes this pass game dangerous, because there's times they have 5 guys in the field that can take it to the house.
Oh, yeah, man. I mean, I view them the same way that I view Notre Dame's rushing attack. Like, there's not been a team so far this year outside of, honestly, Northern Illinois, and from Ohio State outside of Michigan. There hasn't been a team this year that has shown that they can slow down everybody. For Notre Dame, you might be able to stop 1 of or 2 of Riley Leonard, Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, and Aeneas Williams, but you can't stop all of them. It's the same thing with Ohio State's receiving corps. You might go in with the philosophy of, listen, Egbuka's kind of their go-to weapon. He's their third down guy. We can't let him take the game over. And those are the games where Jeremiah Smith has 6 catches for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. Texas went the opposite, and it was, hey, we cannot let Jeremiah Smith break this game open, which I didn't hate that game plan at all based on what he did against Tennessee and what he did against Oregon, right? But then you have Carnell Tate. He goes off. Egbuka, he had 5 catches for 51 yards. I think 2 or 3 of them went for third down conversions, and so it's a hard group to stop on either side of the football when both groups are on.
But I do think that Texas kind of showed, but if Jeremiah isn't taking over a game, it does make it easier to keep the points down.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's the counter to it as well is, they got their yards, but that also kept the points down. But I still think the primary reason the points got kept down is they couldn't run the football when they pressured the quarterback. I think that's a big part of it we'll get into. Scheme-wise, obviously they do a lot of things a lot of people do. They do stops, they do comebacks, they'll run some quick game if you play off coverage. A lot of teams cover Ohio State scared. And that leads to a lot of you look at a lot of the reason that Will Howard has a 70% completion rate. Number one is credit to him. Nobody has that just because of what other teams are doing. It's a credit to him and his ability to make quick decisions and get the ball out. But another part of it too is a lot of teams play off coverage against Ohio State. And they're just going to give up a lot of 5s and 6s, and they do a lot of screen game as well. They're going to throw a lot of RPO screen game against. First play of the game last year. Talking about one of the keys to victory. One of the first play is going to be handling the perimeter throwing game the way that they did last year. First play of the game. They run a little screen off RPO action. Notre Dame blows it up for a 2-yard loss. Those are things you're going to have to do a very good job of this season to really keep this all. I don't say shut it down, but keep this offense in check. That's going to be a big, big part of this game and this game plan for Notre Dame, Trev, is to do that. But they run a lot of. If you're playing off, they'll just pick you apart and complete 80% of their passes, just banging comebacks and stops and deep ends. And playing Nebraska, they got into a 3rd and long, and Nebraska bails their corner, and I think it was Carnell Tate just runs a 15-yard in cut, just catches it and runs for. I'm like, that you're making it easy for him, And I think what Texas did a pretty decent job of, even though his percentage was really high, Texas did a nice job of. You got to make him complete some tough throws. If he's going to beat you throwing the ball over top of a corner in front of a safety, then hey, you know what? Tip your cap to him and say, you earned this championship. But given those easy yards, which a lot of teams in the Big Ten do, and I understand it because they don't have the secondary that Texas has. They don't have the secondary that Notre Dame had. They don't have the secondary that Michigan had last year. I get it. They don't have the secondary even Penn State had to a degree. I do understand that, but the things that I think where they can get you in some problems is the post snap switch stuff that forced communicate. Maybe looking at the first, they almost scored a touchdown against Notre Dame on their field goal drive, where they did that post snap switch and they forced a nickel to go over the top to cover Emeka Egbuka, and by him going over top, Emeka slips inside and he gets open and doesn't catch the ball, but it's close. Should have been a touchdown. Honestly, with a better ball, it would have been a touchdown. And so you're going to have to be able to handle that stuff. They do a lot of crossers. They do a lot of things. They've got speed at receiver. They know it. They do a lot of things to put you in binds. They do a lot of leaking out. They'll kind of disguise guys. You think of the touchdown pass against Penn State. They just kind of hit Emeka Egbuka and then snuck him out, and he gets upfield for a wide open play. They do a lot of that with their tight ends, which obviously Penn State did a pretty decent job of. And the other thing too, Trev, is they are going to look for shots to throw the ball down the field. They don't throw the ball down the field a ton, but they look for their moments. I think this year, according to Pro Football Focus, he's only thrown 44 deep balls all year, has Will Howard. But he's completing 56.8% of those passes, because when he hits them big. And you look at the Nebraska game, what was the difference in that game? Their offense got shut down all game long. 2 plays made the difference in that game. The post route touchdown to Carnell Tate, and then the long over the top touchdown to Jeremiah Smith. Like that's what kind of broke that game open, in my opinion, was those, because once you hit that ball, then all of a sudden you get even if there's like a penalty that negates, one of those touchdowns, right? That still kind of is in your head. But you look at Ohio State against Nebraska, they passed for 221 yards in that game, Trevor. 221 yards. That's it. 100 of those came on 2 completions for touchdowns in the first half. But they were off of, look, you do this to try to take away this, then they're going to come back with this. And they're off play action stuff. So that's, they're going to bang the stuff you give to them. They're going to take the easy throws. They're going to march right down the field, taking the easy throws if you give them to them. They're going to run a lot of crossers and use their speed against you. And then they're going to look for play action shots down the field, slot fades, post routes, corner routes, and just straight. If it's man, if I'm on the left hash and we're playing cover one and your safety's over the left hash, I'm throwing that field go route. I'm just sorry, it's going to happen. And when he gets time to throw, Will Howard has proven to be a very accurate downfield passer when he has time to throw this year. So those are the things we look at and say that's what makes their pass offense. I'm going to try to get some video breakdowns of this before we get to the game. I'm going to try to get some of that. I'm working on finishing up some Penn State breakdowns first, but just to kind of give some examples of what makes their pass game good. But it's that type of stuff, Trev, off of motions and post-snap switches and play action stuff. They give you a lot to think about as a defense.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things that they went to in this postseason, they run a lot of screens. They run a lot of screens to the perimeter. And against Oregon early, they hit one to G. Scott where they had him kind of go out, stalk block for a second, and then take off up the sideline. And he was wide open. They've done that a couple times this postseason. That touchdown that you're talking about that Egbuka had against Penn State where Will Howard rolls out left, kind of looks back, nobody's covering. They ran the same play against Oregon, this time to Jeremiah Smith. Jeremiah Smith was wide open. So, no, they do a lot. They do a lot of different things to get you thinking on the fly. And on top of all of that, it's schemed very well. And then they have the athletes that can then take that over the top, right? And so that's what makes this passing attack so dangerous, man.
When it's vulnerable, Will Howard's not able to have time to go through progressions, and he rushes throws and he gets out of his rhythm. That's really what it comes down to. I think if you're Notre Dame, Trevor, you have to do what you do. I understand Texas did a certain thing to take him away, and Notre Dame will do certain things, in my opinion. They're not just going to – like, there's this perception that because Notre Dame plays man coverage, they just line up and just play cover one or cover zero every time, and there's no variety to it. You just got to beat them. That's not how their defense works. They play a ton of man coverage at corner. They do a lot of different stuff with linebackers and safeties, and they'll mix things up. And perfect example is the play that Notre Dame ran against Penn State at the end of the game. They show too high. It's a pass situation. Penn State does a lot of overs and backside digs. So what does Notre Dame do? They play Christian Gray high. He takes that angle over top. They bring the weak side safety down. He takes away the over route and the corner route. He literally is taking away two routes with his roll. Xavier Watts goes middle of the field, and they take away the first two options. He then comes backside, and Christian Gray makes a big play on it. So they do a lot of those type of different things, but you're going to have to in this game, Trevor, if you're Notre Dame, you're going to have to be who you are. I mean, that's a big part of it is be who you are. And if they're able to do that, then I think they're going to have some success as long as they can get pressure on the quarterback, because the way that the reason that Notre Dame is so good at forcing turnovers, especially interceptions, is because number one, they're talented, right? They have very talented players. That helps a ton. I have a hard time believing that Xavier Watts or Don Schuler, going to drop that fourth quarter pick the way that DJ Brown did. I just think they're better players. I love DJ Brown, and he was so important for Notre Dame last season. But I think these are just better players. I don't think it's a coincidence that when Ramon Henderson and DJ Brown and some of those guys are no longer on your team, that you now have 19 interceptions this season, and you're just a dynamic pass breakup team, even more pass breakups. But a lot of it also comes down to the way that Al Golden runs and Mike Mickens run their coverage structure. As we've said before, how many times have we seen a quarterback throw an in cut where he thinks he's got a guy coming open only to have a backside safety robbing down to make that play? That's exactly what happened to Kyle McCord on the interception that DJ Brown dropped. He had a seam throw, and the guy that jumped it was the opposite side safety who came down to the middle to undercut that route. And so they were high-low on that particular route, and quarterback never saw it. And he throws it. DJ almost picks it and would have ended the game. So those are things that Notre Dame is going to have to do in this game, Trevor, is to do about it. Because when we talk about, where Notre Dame matches up well against Ohio State, it's that right there. They can athletically play with this receiving core, much like last year's cornerback room with Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart could run with them. Same thing about 2 years ago. they can run with him. That doesn't mean that they're going to not get beat from time to time. We saw that against Georgia. We'll see that. So, saw that against Indiana a couple times. And Ohio State's going to hit some big plays. They're going to hit a couple big plays. You got to make sure they're not touchdowns. But there's also a lot of times where Will Howard's not going to have anywhere to go with the football because your coverage structure is pretty good. But the other thing, too, is what Notre Dame does really well is where the linebackers and safeties are going to end up post-snap, you don't always know where that's going to be. And you don't know who's going to cover your slot. You don't know who's going to necessarily handle this part or that part. And so that's why I say for Notre Dame, you got to be who you are. You can't sit there and say, hey, we're going to have to change what we do to stop Jeremiah Smith, because then you're just going to get burned by those two other guys. You've just got to be the best version of who you are, and then create some adjustments to your coverage structure like you do every week that fit what Ohio State does schematically. That's what you need to do. And then you need to do some things that are creating some indecision in Will Howard's mind. You need to get him to the point where he thinks he's saying one thing, but it ends up not being that. That's how you force him into incompletions. That's how you're going to force him into mistakes. And if they can get one of those early, especially, it'll be huge, which we'll get into. But I think that's the one thing that helped Texas. It's the one thing that has helped Michigan last year. It's the one thing that helped Notre Dame the last 2 years. And it's something that I think Notre Dame helps them with them this year is they do have secondary players that can play with this Ohio State group based on what we've seen. And that's why, to a degree, you just got to be who you are. And so did Texas. Texas does a lot more zone than Notre Dame. So it was easier for them to do a lot more of that stuff and take those guys out of the game. But that's the big thing too. And then the other part of it, Trev, well, I'll leave it there and you can kind of respond to that part about that part of the matchup before I move on to the other part.
Yeah, man. I mean, look, it's just getting pressure on Will Howard has to be top of mind. I honestly, there's going to be a lot of conversation around the matchups between Notre Dame's corners and Ohio State's receivers, very similar to like it was last year. But what this group has shown me in back-to-back years is I have that confidence. What I don't have an insane amount of confidence in is the consistency of the pass rush, right? Like it's Notre Dame secondary had a bad game against USC, singular. Whereas the pass rush has been really good at times and really absent at times. And I do believe that there is a correlation between the pass rush and the secondary not being like as effective. You know what I mean? Like if it's not getting home. And Will Howard has shown this season that when he does get pressured, he is a much less efficient quarterback. I mean, you go and look at the games where he's taken multiple sacks. Most of the time that combines with turnovers, which means his quarterback passer rating is lower. And so you look at Tennessee and you look at Oregon when they played him, 0 sacks in each of those games, 10.7 yards per attempt against Tennessee, 12.3 yards per attempt against Oregon. Texas was able to generate some pressure, went down to 8.8 yards per attempt, only threw 1 passing touchdown through a pick. You look at Michigan. Michigan was able to dial up some good pressure on Will Howard, didn't let him get comfortable, averaged 5.3 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 2 picks. Penn State was able to generate a good amount of pressure on Will Howard, made him uncomfortable in the pocket. 7.6 yards per attempt, also threw a pick. So there's a correlation here between making Will Howard uncomfortable and him getting a little bit careless with the football. And Notre Dame's defensive line, really their pass rush as a whole. However, Al Golden sees fit to dial it up, which I know is going to be things that we talk about later, needs to be able to get home and generate some different types of pressure on him, because one thing that people aren't talking about enough is what Notre Dame's cornerback room did to the Penn State receivers. I mean, I think that should be one of the biggest talking points of the game, but of course it's not because it's Notre Dame. But I mean, 0 yards on 0 receptions is crazy. I don't care what level of receiving core that you just went up against. It's one of the crazier stats that I've ever heard. So it's their first time. I saw somewhere that it was like Penn State's first game since like 1983 where a receiver went without having a catch.
Well, and if you remember what Penn State's offense looked like back then,
yeah,
that doesn't surprise you that it because they were that's back when they were pumping out big time running backs and tight ends every year. I mean, so it wouldn't surprise you, but that's an impressive stat. I don't care.
I don't care who you go up against.
Yeah.
Don't care who you go up against. But yeah, I mean, getting home, cornerback play and pass rush getting home are 1A, 1B for me, and it's interchangeable. Well, I
think we've seen this before, Trev. I mean, this is this is what they do when they're on. Now, against USC, they weren't getting good pressure on the quarterback. They had to cover longer, and USC hit more big plays down the field. Not a coincidence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why getting pressure on the quarterback is a big thing. But, we've seen when the pass rush can just be good, doesn't even have to be great, just be good. When we've seen this pass rush be good, we've seen Notre Dame do this to good receiving cores before. I mean, I think they did a great job of keeping Indiana's pass game, shutting it down. You had the one really great catch by Elijah Surratt early in the game. Outside of that, like the receiver numbers for Indiana, Surratt had 4 for 67. Miles Price had 5 for 56. Keyshawn Williams had 5 for 45. Omar Cooper caught one pass for 23 yards and a touchdown. The vast majority of that came in the fourth quarter after it was already 27-3. And that's kind of part of it. But outside of that one pass by Elijah Surratt, and they had like 1/3 and long conversion where Notre Dame's safety just turned the guy loose on the inside. They did a good job of shutting that down in that game. And that's something that they've done all year. I mean, you look at Louisville, Louisville's receivers hit a couple big plays, but they had to be perfect throws for that to happen. I mean, Ja'Cory Brooks and Colin Lacey going 5 for 71 each required them to make some absolute perfect throws and catches. And Will Howard and these receivers can do that. But that's why you're able to make them in check, because it also forces a lot of incompletions. And so when people talk about, has Notre Dame faced a receiving corps like this one? No, they haven't. But they've still faced some pretty good ones, and they've done a good job of shutting down receiving corps. I mean, we saw this against Georgia as well. You had the one big catch down the field. You had a blown coverage that was dropped. But outside of that, I mean, there was no room to work for the Georgia wide receivers in that game. And they did a pretty good job of shutting them down. So we've seen this. We've seen this a lot this year, where they've been able to go play talented receiving corps and shut them down. You think of the Georgia Tech receiving corps that was very good this year, and they completely shut those guys down. I mean, Eric Singleton had 6 catches for 59 yards. Malik Rutherford had 4 for 32. Now, very different type of receiving corps than the Ohio State kids. Very different. But I think those things all kind of help Notre Dame in regard to, can you run with this group? At the end of the day, I don't care who you have in the secondary. If you don't have time, if the quarterback is comfortable in the pocket and has time in the pocket, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. And we have seen that when Notre Dame's not getting pressure on the quarterback, it also tends to be games where they're not shutting down the run. And if those two things are happening, this is going to be a long day for the Notre Dame defense. But if they are doing those things, they absolutely can keep this offense in check.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen it. We've seen it this year. We saw it against Ohio State last year. We saw it against Ohio State in 2022. That's where it's at.
Well, and we've also seen teams do it to Ohio State this year, right? Like, it's not like no defense has been able to keep this offense in check, and Notre Dame is going to have to be the first one to do it, right? Michigan did it. Nebraska did it. At times, IU did it. Yes, I know Ohio State scored 38 points, but they didn't put on an offensive showcase.
Punt return for a touchdown. They had a 7-yard touchdown drive off of a turnover early in the game. They had their late touchdown to put the game away was a 40-yard drive off of a turnover. You're correct. They didn't play very well on offense in that game.
Right. I mean, you go back and you look at, the Penn State game, they didn't play fantastic on offense. The Texas game, honestly, wasn't this offensive showcase, especially in comparison to the first 2 playoff games. I mean, Ohio State's offense scored 21 points in 4 quarters. Like that, to me, like, that's a win. Like, when you have an offense with this much firepower, that is a good day at the office if you're Texas's defense. It's just the offense fumbled the bag, literally and figuratively, at the end of the game, right? So it's not like Notre Dame is tasked with doing something that no team in 2024/2025 has done. And Notre Dame's defense has shown that they can do it to this style of offense. So, yes, absolutely.
One thing that I think is important for this game for Notre Dame, Trevor, is, yes, Notre Dame is going to blitz. They need to blitz. That's who they are. Be who you are. But there have been games where they haven't blitzed as much. If they felt, and I think one of the things that helped them shut down Georgia over the course of the game was that they didn't have to bring 5-6 guys to get pressure on the quarterback. The defensive line did a really good job of getting pressure on the quarterback. They're going to have to do that in this game. That's going to be, and we'll talk more about this in Keys to Victory, but that's the thing, is if you can pressure Will Howard with 4 or 5 guys and drop 6 to 7 in coverage, that's going to be huge. Absolutely huge for this team. If you've got to bring 6 and 7 to get to Will Howard, you better hope you hit home, because if you don't, it's going to be big plays. No question about it. So that's a key for me too. Trev, that's going to do it for sort of the offensive overview. We're going to do a little bit of a stacking up, looking at the numbers here next, and provide some context to these numbers and just look at how these two teams stack up, because this is a really good matchup in a lot of ways. This is a potentially really dangerous offense against what has been for most of the year a really elite offense, or an elite defense for Notre Dame. So we're going to dive into that next. But before we do, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. And of course, as always, make sure you've signed up for our message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Trev, let's get into this stacking up matchup. And I always love doing this. This is a fun part of this game. And you talk about how Notre Dame stacks up on paper against this Ohio State offense. And we're going to start with the run game, because I think both of these teams have some very interesting run game numbers. And at times have been really good, and at times have not been very good. And so when you look at this matchup, first and foremost, neither of these teams appear on paper to be great at this area of the game, right? Notre Dame ranks 41st in yards allowed rushing per game. Ohio State ranks 66th in rushing yards per game. Part of that because they do throw the ball a lot more, and at least more effectively, I should say. Not a lot more, because Will Howard doesn't actually throw a ton of passes. It's just because he completes over 70% of them. But their bread and butter, their yardage for offense is geared around a lot towards throwing the football. And they haven't had a 200-yard rushing game since October 5th against Iowa, when they went for 203. That was their 5th game of the year. Notre Dame, on the other hand, has been a very stout rush defense of late, with the exception of the Penn State game. Now, they buckled down in the second half and performed much better, but a big reason they trailed 10-3 at halftime was because they gave up 141 rushing yards in the first half. And there have been times this year when Notre Dame has done that. But I would say that there are other numbers you look at, Trev, that show that these units are maybe a little bit better than their national ranking on just a yard standpoint would dictate. And that is, look at their yards per attempt. Notre Dame ranks 27th in the country this year, 28th, in the country this year at yards allowed per rush at 3.7. Ohio State ranks 29th in yards per rush at 3.9. And so I would say neither of these parts of the game are the strength of either unit. Notre Dame is not built on being an elite rush defense. Al Golden has said that before. I don't care about having the number 1 ranked rush defense in the country. There have been times, however, when it was very clear that shutting down the run was his number 1 priority. And when they did that, Georgia Tech, Indiana, they shut those teams down. Georgia, another great example. They shut those units down. In other games, they basically almost dared teams to run the ball. They dared Louisville to run the ball, because they figured if you're running the ball, you're not throwing it to to Ja'Cory Brooks and Colin Lacey and Chris Bell. I'm curious if we see a little bit of that against Ohio State, or do they say, hey, look, we're going to have to, be more effective stopping the run, because Ohio State will have no problem going on a 12-play, 75-yard drive that requires them to run the ball 9 times. At least I don't think that they will in this type of moment. So, but I do think both of these units are a little bit more dangerous, Trev, than maybe the numbers would otherwise show. I also think, and I've made this case a bunch of different times, Notre Dame's rush defense is a lot better than people think. It is based on who they've played. And what I mean by that is, what we've said in the past is, if you look at Notre Dame's rush defense and you take away the option teams, actually you take away all the group of 5 teams, and you just look at games where the opponent was a Power 5 team, Notre Dame all of a sudden drops down to 115.1 yards per game. That includes the game over the game against Penn State. Amongst Power 5 teams, that ranks them 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th in college football. Their yards per rush allowed is 3.4, which ranks them around the top 10 as well. So they've been a much better team this year, Trevor, when they've, against than maybe their numbers show, because of the fact that they had to play option teams. And then you look at Ohio State and you look at their games against Power 5 teams. They only rushed for 143.8 yards per game and 4.4 yards per carry. if that plays out, if that right there plays out in this game, Notre Dame will have a great opportunity to slow Ohio State down. If it looks more like the Penn State game, then it will be a much longer day for Notre Dame. But if Notre Dame's rush attack can look like it has against its Power 5 opponents to take out the triple option teams and obviously that early game against Northern Illinois, which is countered by the fact that they shut Miami of Ohio's run game down. So that kind of balances it out. But when you look at Notre Dame's games against Power 5 teams, and for the record, because there are some people that don't think Notre Dame plays very many Power 5 teams because they're an independent. They've played 11 games against Power 5 teams this year. Ohio State has played 12. It's one more game. And, so just keep that in mind. That ranks Notre Dame obviously much higher, Trevor. And those are huge, huge factors in this game. And where I say Notre Dame has the advantage on paper in this matchup, if that advantage carries into the game, then I think that's where Notre Dame has a shot to really keep the points down and give their offense a chance to win it.
Yeah, I said this yesterday, and Ohio State's offense is significantly more dangerous when they're able to run the football, right? And so I have to believe that one of Al Golden's top of mind priorities is preventing them from becoming a balanced offense. I don't know if this is a game where they dare them to run. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if it's going to be like a Louisville where it's please run so you're not throwing it to Jeremiah Smith or Igbuka, because when this offense is at its best, it's when they're able to run the football. Not volume-wise, but from an efficient standpoint, and so that's one thing that gives me a little bit of pause with this. I mean, it's no mystery that Texas kept this a game until the very end because Ohio State as a team had 88 yards rushing. You go back through and you look what Michigan's offense did or what Michigan's defense did, and Ohio State really couldn't get anything going on the ground. And so, to me, I look at what Notre Dame's numbers are from a Power 5 perspective because, we say it, feel like, and I know you know this too, it feels like you and I say this every single week where we kind of have to add the little asterisk of, hey, remember they played 2 triple option teams and respectively to both of them, and they held Army over 100 yards under their average, and they held Navy 25, 26 yards under their average.
And so, a chunk of that they got some yards late in the game.
Yeah.
A couple big runs, right?
Yep. Blake Horvath got 75 of that 224 on one run, I believe. And so, it's just, not to take it away, not saying that it doesn't count, but yeah, you go back through and Notre Dame's run defense is significantly better than what it looks like. And same could be said for Ohio State, because when they do choose to run the ball, they average 5 yards per carry through 15 games. I mean, that's noteworthy, right? That ranks them inside of the top 30 in the country. But, they're not a crazy explosive rushing offense. They have 7 runs of 30 yards or more. I would almost be willing to bet a good amount of money that all those belong to Travian Henderson, right? And so, this is a team that doesn't allow a whole lot of negatives in the rush game, or just a whole lot of negatives in total. I mean, they rank top 10 in the country in tackles for loss allowed. But for me, when this offense wants to, they can be an efficient rushing offense. Notre Dame is going to have to do everything they can to make them a one-dimensional team, because, and it's for a different reason than what the Ohio State defense is talking about, right? For them, we have to make Notre Dame throw it because that makes them, then they would be playing into what is not the strength of their offense. I still believe that the strength of Ohio State's offense is throwing the football, right? Because of the weapons that they have on the perimeter. But it's when Will Howard is able to run play action. It's when he's able to have a ground game behind him, right? That's what makes this offense so dangerous. That's when Chip Kelly can go into his bag. But if Notre Dame's able to stop the run, they can pin their ears back. And the secondary is still the strength of Notre Dame's defense consistently over the course of the season. That makes me feel a lot more confident, opposed to if Ohio State, Travian Henderson, Quinshon Judkins are just starting to rip off 4, 5, 8, 12, 6 at a time.
Which is what Penn State did in the first half.
Right.
And that's what allowed them to eat up a ton of clock. And Notre Dame's offense could never really get into a rhythm because Penn State was moving the ball and just keeping the ball in the first half. And that played a big role, in my opinion, Trevor, and why Notre Dame did struggle at times in that game, because they
Brian, we might have lost you, or my computer's messing up. I don't know if you can hear me. From the sound of the chat, it sounds like you might have froze. Regardless, I guess as they say, the show goes on. And Brian will probably be back here in just a second. So, with that being said, Ohio State's rushing attack gives them the opportunity to be a dual threat offense, right? And I think the thing that gives me a lot of pause is what Notre Dame did against Penn State. It was a tale of two different halves, like we had said before, right? And Penn State started to be able to gash Notre Dame on the ground. They started going for 8 at a time. Like they had 141 rushing yards in the first half. And that is something that you can't afford Ohio State to do. Because if they're able to do that, this becomes a much taller task. I know some of the stats went away, and I have some of them up right now. And I'm sorry that you guys can't see them. But if you go through and you look, like I said before, TreVeyon Henderson doesn't have any games where he's gone over 100 yards. But what he's done is he's been very, very, very efficient in these games, right? I mean, against Marshall, he averaged 12.6 yards per carry. Against Purdue, he averaged 14.1 yards per carry. Against Michigan State, he averaged 9.8 yards per carry. Against Oregon, the kid averaged 11.7 yards per carry. So he's almost at 12 yards a carry in those games. And so when you go through and you look at how they use him, it's unmatched. Right. I'm very high on Notre Dame's running back room. I'm very high on Ohio State's. I was very high on Penn State's. And Notre Dame in the first half of the Penn State game was not able to. They were not able to shut him down in the slightest. And so it's going to come down to that, because everybody knows how dangerous Ohio State is on the perimeter, which leads us into the next matchup. Right. It leads us into the passing game matchup. And of course, I don't have the numbers up with me, so I apologize there. But it's going to be the Notre Dame pass defense versus the Ohio State pass offense. Right. I do have some numbers up. I don't know if I'm going to be able to share them with you guys, so give me just a second here. But it goes without saying, Ohio State, I believe, has the best receiving core in the country. And I'm pretty sure a good amount of people in the chat can agree with that as well. I know Archer will. I know Archer and Mr. Bucknuts will, but it's for good reason. They have the deepest receiving room, I think, in college football, but again, they have the numbers to back it up. So give me just a second while I get these pulled up here. So Ohio State this year, and you guys are just going to have to get the listening ears on, because I'm sorry I can't show this to you, but actually, I might be able to. Give me just a second. Let's see if I can do this. No, I cannot. Apologies. But Ohio State, from a passing game perspective, they rank 25th in the country. They average 265.1 yards per game. But again, the numbers that we always pay attention to is efficiency. And they average 9.2 yards per attempt, which ranks them 4th in the country. So not only do they pass for a good amount of yards per game, what they're able to do is they are very efficient with how they do it. I believe they average over 14 yards per completion, which I also believe to be ranked inside of the top 5 in the country. They rank number 3 overall in quarterback rating at 170. That's 3rd in the country. And they're 13th in the country in sacks allowed. They've only allowed 14 sacks this year for 92 yards. When you go and you start looking at the Notre Dame defensive side of it, Notre Dame's pass defense, again, ranks very elite in the country. And again, they are one of the top pass defenses in the country. So they rank 2nd in yards per game at 165.3. That ranks them 2nd in the country. They rank, I think Brian might be coming back. There we go. Thank you, Brian. Notre Dame's pass defense ranks 3rd in the country in yards per attempt at 5.8. And they rank 43rd in the country in yards per completion. They are the number 1 team in the country in completion percentage allowed, which I believe them at being 50.7, they had just crossed over the threshold of allowing over 50% completion, because for the better half of the season, they ranked under 50%. They haven't allowed a whole lot of passing touchdowns this season. They rank inside of the top 15. They've only allowed 12 passing touchdowns. And they're one of the best defenses in the country at forcing interceptions. They have 19 on the year, which ranks them top 5. When you go and you break down pass efficiency defense, they are the number 1 pass efficiency defense in college football. And they have done a decent job at generating pressure. They have 38 sacks on the season, which does rank them inside of the top 40. But it's going to be, again, like we talked about throughout the rest of the show, getting home on Will Howard is something that has to be top of mind. Because when he has shown at times throughout this season that when he is pressured, he will turn the football over. He becomes a less efficient passer. Some of those numbers on the right-hand side don't look as gleaming when he is under pressure. Right? They're very efficient passing offense. The passer rating on the year averages 169.9, which ranks them 3rd in the country. But you go through and you look at the games, like I said before, you look at the games where Will Howard hasn't performed the best. His passer rating has I don't want to call it a steep drop off, but it is a drop off in efficiency in comparison to what he is when he is protected the proper way. Right. So these are the numbers here. A lot of them speak for themselves, and it's what you would expect from the 2 highlighted areas of this game. Right. You have I don't think the run game is being talked about enough personally. Excuse me, if you ask me, but this is kind of the highlight of it, right? This is the, albeit what you want to call like the preview for the big games. So you have the Notre Dame secondary on one hand, you have the Ohio State receivers on the other hand, and it's exactly what was talked about in 2023. And to me, again, it will still come down to who wins in the big moments, because last year it was Ohio State in those key moments on that final drive of the game where Igbuka goes down and he has a really good final drive. Kyle McCord was able to convert 3rd and 10, 3rd and 19, 4th and 7. And, the list goes on, and we know what that's about. But welcome back, Bryan. Just covering the Notre Dame passing game time.
You're going to have to kind of keep rolling on this because our internet went out because of the storm. I don't know if you guys can even hear me now. So I'm connected on my phone. So I have like almost no connection right now. Can you guys hear me okay right this second, or is it bad?
The audio's good. The video's a little laggy, but we can hear you.
All I care about is the audio. If the audio starts going out, let me know.
Okay.
But yeah, we just got an alert that our internet is down in the area, so we're trying to get that fixed. So, but anyway, keep going, man. I mean, you're doing a great job of breaking down. This is the dangerous part of that team. I mean, if they beat Notre Dame, barring it being a game like last year, 17-14, then it's going to be another example of you couldn't stop their pass. It's going to be an example of you couldn't stop their pass game. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. And I know, like, it was great to shut down the Penn State receivers last week, and you're not going to shut down these receivers like that. But they also don't have, with all due respect to G. Scott and their other tight ends, Jelani Thurman and those other guys, they don't have a Tyler Warren either. They do have talented backs in the pass game like Penn State had. So, but it comes down to Drew Aller could never get comfortable in that game, and they've got to make sure that the same thing happens with Will Howard. Because if you look at it, Trev, the number that sticks out, 25, 4, 4, 5, 3, 9, 10. What's the one number that sticks out? Interceptions. Now, I know they played more games, but you look at the games that he has struggled this year, that Will Howard has struggled, or the offense has struggled. That's been a big part of it. That inability to consistently move the ball and make those plays in the pass game, but also more importantly, the turnover. Now, he didn't throw a turnover against Oregon, but he had a bad turnover early against Iowa, which slowed down that offense. He threw 2 picks against Michigan in that game. You look at the Texas game, he's 10.7 per attempt against Tennessee, 12.3 per attempt against Oregon. But despite completing over a 7 percentage point higher completion percentage against Texas compared to Oregon, he was down 3.5 yards per attempt at 8.8, which is still pretty good. But that was bolstered huge by a 75-yard catch and run. Now, I'm not one of those people that's like, well, if you take that play out of the game, they didn't play that well. Well, that was a big part of the game. So I'm not saying this is like, hey, take that part away. But I am saying that outside of that, they were only 6.7 yards per attempt. And he had no other touchdowns and a pick in that part. And that's going to be the big key is when that's happening, then Notre Dame has a shot. Did you get to the Notre Dame side yet, or were you just on the Ohio State part looking at the numbers?
I was kind of covering both at the same time. Conversation was going a little bit hand in hand. So, but yeah, I mean, it was, I agree. Again, it's what I talked about a lot of was getting pressure on Will Howard has to be top of mind, because we've seen it at other points throughout this season, right? When Notre Dame's pass rush isn't able to get home, quarterbacks like a Jaden Maeva have had one. He had a really good game. I'm not trying to take that away from the kid at USC, right? I'm not going to say, well, he had a good game because Notre Dame sucked that day. Maeva had some really good throws that game, in my opinion. Like you always hear that old saying of there's no defense for a perfect throw, and he made a couple of those. Now, there were also a lot of mistakes on Notre Dame's end that we've talked about before too, right? But that was a game where the pass rush wasn't able to get home. And up until late in the game, they weren't able to get pressure on Maeva. And then when they did, they had back-to-back pick sixes. You know what I mean? And so that's just going to be some of the differences that have to be the key. I mean, Notre Dame in 2023 did a really good job of getting pressure on Kyle McCord up until the final drive. And Kyle McCord was able to sit back. He picked the defense apart and drove him right down the field and scored a touchdown with 1 second left on the clock. And so getting home is going to be imperative, because those two things go hand in hand for me when we talk about Notre Dame's pass defense, and the numbers correlate. You know, I mean, Notre Dame holds teams to 165.3 passing yards per game. It's second in the country, but it's not just because like they didn't do to Penn State what they did to like all of their other opponents, right? It's not like that at all. They've had games where they've generated a lot of pressure. You know, I mean, they not eliminate. They don't allow that many big plays. They rank, again, they have 12 passing plays of 30 yards or more. They've also played 15 games, you know, so you kind of take those numbers with both of these teams into account, like you alluded to earlier. But
it's less than one per game.
Yeah.
And I could point to at least 2 or 3 that were made, like the Purdue 50-yard gain was made against the backups. That was the play where Kennedy Urlacher took out Jaden Mickey. One of the best hits of the year. Unfortunately, it's against your own player. You know, we've had a couple, you know, the late throw to Malachi Fields against Virginia. But you know, what's one of the more fascinating statistics for Ohio State is how they rank 4th in completion percentage in the country. They rank 9th with most passing plays of 30 yards or more, yet they only rank 35th in yards per completion. The reason why is that Will Howard completes a lot of passes at the line, behind the line, or right past the line of scrimmage. And what that does is that allows his receivers to make a lot of plays. And so when you look at like Will Howard's distribution of passes this year, he's completed, you know, PFF has him down for 291 completions. See, 25 of those were 20 yards or more down the field. It's a small percentage. At 10.9%, 23.9% of his throws were 10 to 19 yards down the line of scrimmage. 43% were less than 10, and 16.9% were behind the line, at or behind the line of scrimmage. And so what they do, and what I think is smart, Trev, is that they allow their receivers to make more plays. And I think that they don't put Will Howard in as many downfield situations. I mean, if you look at it, as I just said, what was the number I said? It was 50. Was it 58 deep balls? What was the number?
That one? I thought it was like 44, like deep passes thrown this season.
Yeah, 44. You're correct. That's in 15 games. CJ Stroud threw 61 in 13 games in 2022. Now, again, that's CJ Stroud. You get the point that I'm making. Right. They 29.7% of their throws were 30 yards or were between 10 and 19. So that's a total of, let's see here, 45.3. And it was obviously a part of their offense that they used a lot more 2 years ago. And it's not just because of the quarterback difference, but I think the quarterback difference is part of it, because and I think it's smart. They're not putting Will Howard in as many deep shot opportunities. I mean, last year If you look at Kyle McCord, he threw 48 deep shots in 13 games. So now the difference is I think Will Howard's completing them at a higher rate too, because they're more targeted with their deep shots. It's not just, hey, we're just coming out throwing bombs. It's, we see something in your defense where we think we can take a one-on-one shot. We're going to take it. And then Will Howard, when he has time, has been a very accurate deep ball thrower this year. The two balls he threw against Nebraska were dimes. I think now Jeremiah Smith was wide open, but Carnell Tate, the backside post route, that's a really good throw. I mean, this is a really good ball over top of the defense. And so, but it is interesting that they rank 9th in plays of 30 yards or more and 4th in completion percentage, but only rank 35th in yards per completion. That's a very fascinating, but that stat also matters because the one thing Notre Dame has done is at times give up more yards per catch. They both have a very weird statistic in that regard. That makes it very interesting. But I think that completion percentage battle is one that I'm going to keep my eye on. Completion percentage and yards per attempt. Yards per attempt is, if you want to know the biggest number that I'm going to be focused on in that game, Trev, it's going to be yards per attempt. And that means two things in this matchup. Number one, Notre Dame is rallying to the football and limiting yards after the catch, something they did not do a good job of in the first half against Ohio State last year. I can think of off the top of my head 3 or 4 third down conversions in the first half that where guy got hit 4 or 5 yards short of the first down marker and they just missed. Can't have that. Got to tackle well. But
especially after the last game against Penn State, got to tackle well. When all those factors on the table has to happen. Sorry.
No, you're good, man. This is part of the conversation. And then the other part of it, too, is if you're forcing more completions, that's going to lower the yard per attempt as well. And that's why the completion percentage matters to me. Now, look, Will Howard is most likely going to go well over what Notre Dame allows in completion percentage. Notre Dame's given up 50.7. His lowest number of the season is 57.6. That was against Michigan. That's the nature of their offense. I mean, when you're talking about an offense that throws over 50% of their passes less than 10 yards down the line of scrimmage, you're going to complete those at a higher rate, much higher rate. And of those throws, he's completing over 80% of his throws. He's, and that's Kyle McCord's number. Will Howard, I think, is actually a little bit higher than that. But the point is, Trev, is that you've got to be able to, if you can take away the quick stuff or limit the effectiveness and force him to throw the ball down more in contested situations, that's where Notre Dame's going to do a better job of forcing incompletions. And then also, if you can pressure the quarterback and get him out of the pocket, maybe get some throwaways, that helps too. And I think those are going to be big parts of it. Because like Drew Aller was another guy that had a very high completion percentage coming into that game. And Notre Dame was able to keep him in check and keep him around 50% throwing the football in that game. And they've been able to do that to several offenses this season. But as we said before, he didn't have Jeremiah Smith and guys like that. But Drew Aller ended the season at 66.7% completion rate, which is really good. Obviously, he was higher than that going into the Notre Dame game. I believe he was. Let's just look at the numbers. I mean, I think he was close to 67. I'm just pulling up the numbers now here real quick. So he had 371 attempts on the season. So 250 divided by 371. He was at 67.4 coming into the game. Notre Dame held him to 52.2. Now the difference is, there have been several performances like that from Will Howard. He was at about 52 against Boise. He was at 51 against Oregon. A lot of his numbers were kind of from, dominating against 89% against Purdue, 81% against Kent State. Whereas when you look at Will Howard has some games where he had a higher completion rate against better teams. He was at 82.8 against Tennessee, 65.4 against Oregon, 84.6 against Indiana. But, I think if you can keep the yards down and keep the yards per attempt low, because he completed 84.6 against Indiana, but he completed 7.7 yards per attempt. If you can keep him below 8 yards per attempt, you got a pretty good shot at keeping this offense in check. Because that either means no deep balls Or B, yeah, maybe they hit a deep ball, but then you have a lot of incompletions and -2s because you're rallying, and a lot of +2s because you're rallying to that quick game and shutting them down. I think that factors into it as well.
Yeah, it's going to be keeping everything in front of you. I mean, Ohio State's receivers, for as much credit as we give them for their downfield playmaking ability, they are also good after the catch. There's a reason why they're given 6'3" Jeremiah Smith, a true freshman, 6'3", 215 end arounds. Like, there's reasons why they're giving him jet sweeps. And we saw it last year too. They're willing to do anything that they can to get the ball into the hands of Emeka Egbuka. So yeah, it's all different things that Notre Dame is going to have to be prepared for. I think that's one of the reasons why, their yards per completion ranks lower, but they have like 30 or 27 pass plays of 30 yards or longer. Some of it's their after the catch ability too. So yeah, man, I mean, it's going to be one that everything has to be kept in front of you, and tackling. I mean, little spoiler alert here, but especially after the performance against Penn State, tackling is almost going to be my number one key to victory for the defense, because it's just you can't have plays like that like you did against Penn State. Because if you're missing tackles on guys like Jeremiah Smith in the open field, if you're missing tackles like guys on Travion Henderson in the open field, they could go, right? Like that's kind of the offset for me of they don't have a Tyler Warren at tight end, but Notre Dame, even though they were missing tackles on Tyler Warren, there was always somebody that was close to rally around and bring him down a couple yards after contact. I don't know if you're going to get that opportunity with Travion Henderson. I don't know if you're going to get that opportunity with Jeremiah Smith. So it's going to be one where tackling is going to be huge for the secondary. They're going to have to bring their A game on Monday for sure. Absolutely, for sure.
I also want to point out, Trevor, little statistic, because I know that there's some in the Ohio State fandom that will make this statement. Well, Notre Dame's pass defense isn't as good as our pass defense because they play Navy team. They play option teams. That's very true. Notre Dame held both of their option opponents to less than 100 yards this season. But I also want to point out that if you only look at Power 5 games, so that means no option teams, Notre Dame still ranked 5th amongst Power 5 teams in yards allowed per game. Notre Dame also allowed their Power 5 opponents to pass for 5.8 yards per play, which is exactly what they did on the season.
Yeah.
So their yards per attempt this season against Power 5 opponents was identical to what it was, and it was still number 1 in college football amongst Power 5 teams. Against Power 5 opponents, they gave up 11 passing touchdowns and still had 16 interceptions in 11 games against Power 5 opponents. So no option teams included, neither of the MAC teams included. If you look at quarterback efficiency against only Power 5 opponents, Notre Dame had the number 1 pass defense in college football. Number 2 was Texas. Number 3 was BYU. Number 4 was Ohio State. So I just want to point out, and I'm talking about, we've said this before, again, of other Power 5 teams, because like Florida Atlantic's number 1, they played 1 game against Power 5 team. UAB played 1. So I'm looking against other Power 5 teams where they actually had to play a Power 5 only schedule. So I just want to point that out. Notre Dame's completion percentage allowed against Power 5 only teams is 52.1. Again, still number 1 in college football among Power 5 teams against other Power 5 opponents. Only Old Dominion, who played 2 games, UAB in 1 game, Florida Atlantic in 1 game, were higher. So Notre Dame's stats don't change when you look at where they rank amongst other Power 5 teams. So, and we held they held Penn State to 135 yards passing. They held Texas A&M to 100 yards passing. They held Purdue to $124. They held Stanford to 87. They held Florida State to 88. They held Indiana to 215, and the vast majority of that came in the fourth quarter when Notre Dame was up 3 touchdowns. Over 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, Curtis Rourke had under 100 yards passing, I'm pretty sure. He had like 90-something yards passing going into the fourth quarter.
That's right.
Let me also, just to continue to add to your point, Brian, yes, Notre Dame played 2 service academies this year. The 2 service academies rank 132 and 134, respectively, in passing yards per game. You know who's 131? Michigan.
Yes, there you go.
Do you know who's 130? Iowa. Do you know who's 113th? Purdue, common opponent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like you can go through and we can play this game all day, right? Of Ohio
Right.
State's pass defense is better because they didn't have to play, or they didn't play service academy schools to bump up their stats. I mean, Michigan had 62 yards passing. I don't want to hear it, right? And yes, part of that was also because Ohio State has a very good defense.
Yes.
Like I'm not
We're not challenging that Ohio State has an elite secondary. We're saying
right,
they do.
right.
We're pushing back on the notion that, well, Notre Dame doesn't. And it's because it's one of those really lazy arguments
Yes.
that you don't hear. Like you'll never hear Archer make that argument.
Right.
You'll never hear him make that argument because he's in our show all the time. He understands what this, but you hear that a lot more than you should.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. And so now Ohio State also did a great job against Indiana.
Yes, they did.
With their pass defense. They also did a great job shutting those teams down. But Ohio State also has given up a lot of passing yards their last couple games. Why? Because they played better opponents who had to throw the ball a lot because Ohio State had leads on them. I mean, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden they aren't good at throwing the football. Them giving up 283 yards passing to Texas does not mean that Ohio State doesn't have a good pass defense. They held them to 7.3 yards per attempt. That's why I say those are the numbers that matter more than total yards. It's that number right there is, can Notre Dame keep Ohio State under 8, and can their offense get to 8? That's going to be a big key in the game if you're looking at it from a Notre Dame defense standpoint. I mean, look, Ohio State's offense passed for 289 yards. Texas's offense passed for 283 yards. Texas passed for 2 touchdowns. Ohio State passed for 1 touchdown. Here's a big difference. Ohio State averaged 8.8 yards per pass attempt. Texas averaged 7.3. And they say, well, yeah, a lot of that was on one play. Exactly. Because Ohio State's pass offense was able to generate that big play that changed the game, and Texas couldn't.
Yep.
That's what that means. That doesn't mean, well, if you take that away, Ohio State didn't do a whole lot. No, it means they were able to make the big play. And because here's the thing, fluky touchdowns count for as many points as regular touchdowns. I learned that when I was growing up playing football. Did you know that? Were you aware of that? Just like passing touchdowns for a quarterback count as much as a quarterback rushing for a touchdown to count the same amount of points.
At least I've heard. That's what I've heard.
Right.
That is what I've heard. And also, like, at the end of the half, fluky maybe. That was also a great play call.
Great play call. And a great run. Great blocking downfield by the Ohio State lineman, and Travion Henderson did a great job.
Fantastic. I mean, the offensive line was in a position where they were running full speed before Travion even caught the football.
Right.
Like, fluky touchdown to me is like Hail Mary. Like, what do you remember the Ole Miss Bama game where Chad Kelly got hit and he just threw it in the air, the ball got tipped up, and then
it tipped up and then went forward, and the Ole Miss guy ran underneath it. Yes,
right. Like that
fluky
to me,
touchdown is returning a kick, a missed field goal,
right?
109 yards for a touchdown. Yes,
right. Like a fluky touchdown. Like I understand. Like there's a difference between improbable and fluky. Like odds of Travion going to the house off of a 75-yard screenplay are slim. It's obviously not 0. And it was a great play call. It was one of those that was set up to literally just be like, well, we'll see what he gets out of this.
That's why you give your playmakers the ball in that situation and don't just take a knee.
Yes.
Look, like, let's see if we can crease one and then get in. And that's where I think that play call was better than what Bobo did late in the second half against Notre Dame.
Yeah.
He dropped back. Let's drop back, try to throw one down the field, and then Notre Dame gets that big pressure. Ohio State's not going to make that same mistake. They're going to say, hey, let's get the ball outside to Travion. Let's run a little tunnel screen to Emeka. Let's do something where maybe we try to run a little screen to Jeremiah and try to get one. And if we get one, then you can drop back and maybe take some shots down the field. And Ohio State does that a ton. You're going to see anytime you get into sort of a gotta score situation, whether they're down, whether there's not a lot of time left on the clock, whenever Ohio State gets into we need to make a big play, there's a good chance you're going to see a screen to Travion. A very good chance you're going to see a screen. And you know what I call that, Trevor? Good play calling.
Yeah.
Get your most dynamic player the football in space. Who knew? Who knew that that's a great idea? And that's something Mike Denbrock's done a pretty good job of this year, and that's something that Chip Kelly's done a really good job of later in the season. And I think that was a big change to what has really led to this offense being more effective in the postseason compared to where it was in the regular season. Is they're saying, hey, look, because how long have we been saying this, Trevor? I don't understand why Travion Henderson's not a bigger part of the offense. We talked about that all season. I talked about that with Bill Bender. And then later in the year, and maybe, honestly, Trev, maybe that was part of their plan. Hey, look, we don't need Travion to beat Akron and Western Michigan and Iowa and teams like that. We need him to beat Penn State. We need him to beat Nebraska. We need him to beat, some of these other teams. And when you saw his usage get ramped up, you saw him be more effective. I mean, you say he hasn't had a 100-yard rushing game, and you're 100% correct. But you know what he's done? He's gone over 100 yards of total offense in every playoff game they've played so far, because he had 80 yards rushing. I'm not saying your point was correct, because we were talking just run game at the time. We're now talking a little bit different.
Yeah.
Against Tennessee, he had 80 yards rushing and 54 yards receiving, 134 yards. Against Oregon, he had 94 yards rushing on 8 carries. And it's 114 yards. Against Texas, he only had 42 yards rushing, but he had that 75-yard touchdown run, which gets you to 117 yards. I mean, as they've ramped him up, the offense has been better. It's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. And that's what makes Ohio State dangerous, because, hey, you can shut down Jeremiah Smith. You can hold Emeka in check as far as like big plays and a lot of numbers, but you can't then also shut down Travion and also shut down Carnell Tate. At least nobody's been able, outside of Michigan, has been able to do it yet. But I would even argue that Michigan didn't necessarily do it. That was more about the Ohio State coaching staff doing that.
I was about to say, yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It's somebody shut them down. I don't think it was the people in maize and blue.
Right. I mean, they did too. I mean, they kicked Ohio State's butt in the trenches.
In the trenches,
there's a lot of things that they did not do on the perimeter to take advantage of their skill.
Right.
And I don't see them making that same mistake against Notre Dame. I hope they do. I hope that Ohio State comes out and runs the exact same game plan against Notre Dame that they ran against Michigan, in an attempt to prove that they can do it. Please do that. I would love to do that, because I think the outcome would be the same. Let's wrap up here, Trev, with the look here at the overall numbers of the actually, this is incorrect. This is the Notre Dame offense against the Ohio State. So let me just pull up the correct one here real quick. But when we look at the Notre Dame defense against the Ohio, here we go. This is it. So I was like 37 points a game. I'm pretty sure the Notre Dame defense didn't allow that. And Ohio State's only scoring 12. This is the wrong game. This is Purdue against. This is the correct statistic. And you see that there's, Notre Dame has the number 2 scoring defense. Ohio State's number 12. Notre Dame has the number 9 yards per game. Ohio State's 30th. I'll make the same argument for Ohio State's offense that I make for Notre Dame's offense. Yards per game is not indicative of how good the offense is. That's more about opportunity and also about field position. They rank 3rd in yards per play. And we've made that same argument about Notre Dame, Trevor, and because it's facts, it's truth. Yards per game only tells you how many opportunities. You can only maximize your yards to a certain degree. If I have 10 possessions and I start all those 10 at the 50-yard line and I score every time, and you have 10 possessions and you score from your own 25 every time, you're going to have a lot more yards than I'm going to have. But guess what we're going to have at the end of the game? Same amount of points, right? And so that's why I've always said that yards per play is a much better barometer for how good an offense is. Notre Dame this season, when you look at their total offense, they rank 52nd in the country in total offense. They rank 22nd in the country in yards per play. Ohio State ranks 30th in the country in yards per game, but they rank 3rd in the country in yards per play. That's more indicative of what kind of offense they are, not that 30th. Red zone offense, they're both very good in red zone offense, red zone defense. This one right here, Trevor, to me, these next 3 are going to largely determine this game. Notre Dame's 3rd down defense, which ranks 5th, against Ohio State's 3rd down offense, which ranks 57th. And you have to incorporate that with the next one. Notre Dame ranks 11th in the country in fewest plays of 30 yards or more. Ohio State ranks 16th. If Notre Dame can get off the field on 3rd down and limit big plays, they're going to do well in this game, especially if you incorporate turnovers. Notre Dame is the number 1 turnover team in the country. Ohio State's the number 32 offense in the country in forcing turnovers. Notre Dame was second in the country in turnovers before the playoffs started. So this isn't one of those volume things where because you've turned the ball over a bunch. I think these three things, how well Notre Dame performs in these three situational football areas, Trevor, is going to go a long way towards determining who wins this football game. And you should probably throw in the red zone in there too, because Notre Dame did a great job in the red zone against Ohio State last year. And that also led to, Notre Dame being able to win this football game, was being able to keep them out of the end zone and, until that final drive. When they had 11 on the field, they did a pretty good job of keeping them out of the end zone. But that's going to, these last four things, I think is going to define the game. That's what I think.
Situational football has been huge for Notre Dame in the playoffs, right? You go back through and you look at what happened in the Georgia game. I think it was 2 of 14 on third down, 0 of 2 on fourth down, and 0 of 2 or 0 of 3 in the red zone. It was some combination of those numbers against Georgia, right? Then you go through and you look at Notre Dame historically this season has not had a fantastic third down offense. They went, 7 for 11 against Penn State? Or it was 11 of
you talking about Ohio State, or are you talking about Notre Dame?
No, Notre Dame's offense in –
Oh, they had a phenomenal third down. You talking about their offense against Penn State?
Yes.
They had one of their best performances of the season. My internet's
like 11 of 17, I think.
To my phone right now. It was 11 of 17. You're correct. It was literally, Trevor, their best third down performance of the season. They had from a volume standpoint, 11 was their most. Their previous high was 8 against Navy. But it was also their highest percentage. Their previous high percentage was also against Navy of 61.5%.
So situational football, again, has just been massive for Notre Dame. And on paper, they hold the advantage on the defensive side, right? They are one of the best teams in the country at getting off the field on third down. Ohio State ranks outside of the top 50 in keeping drives alive, honestly. I mean, they're at 41.6%. Red zone is going to be huge for me because the two stats kind of compete against each other, right? Notre Dame is the 8th best defense in red zone scoring percentage. So when teams do make it inside of the 20-yard line, not a lot of them have success putting points up on the board. Ohio State, they rank inside of the top 40, which is still good, right? Like they put points on the board 87.5% of the time, But the biggest differentiator is once Ohio State's offense, because it will happen, right? Once Ohio State's offense reaches inside of the 20-yard line, will Notre Dame's defense be able to force field goals? Will they be able to keep Ohio State out of the end zone? Because Ohio State is the 3rd best team in the country in scoring touchdowns once they reach the red zone, which on the flip side for Notre Dame, that has not been the strength of their red zone defense. Now, some of those numbers are slightly skewed because there's been, touchdowns given up by like the second team defense in garbage time. Like I can think of 2 or 3 off the top of my head, but still the number still remains. It's not like if you take those away, they go from 31st to 7th, right? In touchdown scoring percentage.
Would you say they're probably top 20 to 25?
Yeah.
You take away the 2 against Virginia. You had 1 against Purdue. Didn't Indiana get a late red zone garbage touchdown against Notre Dame as well?
Yeah. I mean, depending on what your definition is of late, you could make the argument that 2. I mean,
was their second touch? Because remember, I had to leave to go start the post-game show, so I didn't see their second touchdown.
I don't know.
Both of them red zone touchdowns?
I know one of them was. I don't know if
actually it was. I just looked at the stats. Both of their touchdowns, their 2 touchdowns were both red zone touchdowns.
Okay,
that Notre Dame gave up. I'm sorry, that's Notre Dame offense. Sorry, let me look at the Notre Dame defense. So
I know
Indiana
one of them
had
was
one
in
of
the
their
red
3.
zone. Okay,
one of their 3 was a red zone touchdown. So yeah.
Okay, so. But yeah, I'm with you. I have them somewhere inside of the top. Like I had them somewhere in like that 19 to 24 range, if I'm being honest with you, somewhere in there. But again, it still stands. Whether it's 19 to 24th or 31st, they're going up against the number 3 red zone touchdown scoring offense in the country. So that's going to be a huge matchup. But situational football has been huge for Notre Dame, winning the turnover battle, getting off the field on third down, preventing teams from putting up points once they get inside of the 20, which honestly, some of that is like the turnovers gained. Like some of them have been inside of the red zone, which is why their red zone scoring percentage, their ability to block kicks That's why some of their red zone scoring percentage as a whole is 8th in the country, but their touchdown percentage is 31st in the country. So I'm with you, Brian. Situational football is going to be huge in this matchup. Going to be really huge.
I agree, Trev. Am I back?
Man. Yep, I think so.
Okay. I just switched my internet. My internet seems to be back up now. So
we're so back.
Yeah. Now, if I go out again, Trev, you just do what you did last time, man. Just keep on rolling. So just did a great job there. So thanks for that. But you're spot on. Situational football and turnovers are going to be huge in this game. Absolutely huge in this game. And you know, Ohio State has actually turned the ball over a decent amount in their last 5 games. They just haven't been the crucial turnovers. You know, they had a turnover against they lost a interception against Texas. They had an interception against Tennessee, which you and I talked about was like not really impactful. 2 turnovers against Michigan and the turnover against Indiana. You know, so they've actually been 5 out of 5. I mean, the last 5 games, they've turned it over 5 times and forced 5 turnovers. So Notre Dame's going to have to force turnovers and then not give the ball back.
Right.
That's going to be a big key in this game. Big.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. They got to be selfish, man. Take the football and keep it for yourself.
Yep.
Selfish football is going to be huge.
Absolutely. But you know, again, one thing that they did not do well against Penn State is they did not hold Penn State to field goals when they got in the red zone. And matter of fact, the only time Penn State did kick a field goal was on a play where their running back dropped a pass on 3rd down. It wasn't that Notre Dame defense made a stop. And, you know, and that's it's an interesting aspect of this game, Trevor, because there's some things that you see from these teams where they'll have a struggle, but the good units usually don't struggle 2 games in a row. So like the idea of Jeremiah Love going 2 games in a row of not producing, I don't feel great about, you know, if you're looking at it from a Notre Dame standpoint, right? I mean, you know, him not producing this isn't the first time he hasn't had big games, but then you kind of say, okay, well, you don't think that's going to happen, but go look at the Indiana Michigan games back to back. He had 8 catches for 69 yards in those back-to-back games, because that's what good defenses can do to you. Then he goes off against Tennessee and Oregon. You think of the Notre Dame defense. Well, you don't expect the Notre Dame defense to not be good in the red zone 2 games in a row, but, you know, it's happened before. And so those are going to be the interesting aspects of this game, Trev. And I can't wait. This is going to be such a great battle. 2 great offensive minds, 2 talented units going toe-to-toe. I can't wait. I can't wait to watch this battle. It's going to be a ton of fun. So that's a statistical matchup, Trev. We're going to wrap things up with a look here in a minute of the matchups that matter most from a personnel standpoint. But before we do, folks, do us a favor. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review. This one will be for Trevor for locking things down when the internet decided. I didn't even think about that with the snowstorm we're having today. I should have probably prepped you beforehand, like just in case the internet goes out, you got to take over, man. But, you know, so you did a great job. So give us that 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate that. And as always, of course, make sure you sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So, Mr. Trowbridge, let's get the statistical stuff off the board and let's talk about the matchups that matter. And what this segment is we're going to look at a few matchups that we think are key to Notre Dame either winning or holding their own. Some of them are about winning. You need to win that matchup. In others, it's you just need to not get dominated in that matchup. And it's not that you can't win it. It's just that winning isn't necessarily required for you to win this football game. And we'll dive into 3. I've got 3, Trev, and I know some of these we're going to be on the same page on. I'm curious to hear what other ones you have. But this is where a lot of this game is going to be decided. The scheme is important and big picture things like execution, and we'll dive into the keys to victory and all that kind of stuff. But it also, at the end of the day, all those things are about what? Players making plays. Who wins the player matchup? And Notre Dame's defense has been challenged a lot here in this postseason by good units and talented players. They're going to get challenged once again by an offense that's probably at the skill positions the most talented that they've faced this year. I believe that to be true. Just looking at all the different skill positions, like Penn State's better than them at tight end. I think Penn State's slightly better than them at running back. but the gap between receivers is enormous, right? But you could make a case that Penn State, quarterback talent is similar. I think Drew Aller's more talented than Will Howard. I think Will Howard has a lot more experience and a little bit more polished than Drew Aller, but that matters more to me than NFL draft potential, right? They faced, Louisville had a talented group. It's not like, with all due respect to Ja'Cory Brooks and Colin Lacey and Chris Bell, they're not as good as Ohio State's pass catchers, and they're not as good as running back as Ohio State is. So I think this is the most talented group they faced all year. I would argue that this is also the best defense that Ohio State will have faced all year. But Ohio State's offense has also been challenged this year by playing some pretty good defenses. So Penn State's, as Notre Dame fans found out, Penn State's got a really good defense. Indiana's got a really good defense. Michigan has a really good defense. Michigan didn't struggle this year because of their defense, Trev. They struggled this year because of their offense. And Ohio State didn't always perform well in those games, but then they faced a very highly regarded defense in Tennessee and lit them up, right? And then Texas, obviously, is very highly regarded defense, very talented defense, and they held them in check to a degree, but Ohio State did enough to win. What's it going to look like in this game? I don't know. Let's talk about the matchups. And I think the first one is the most obvious, and that's the matchup in the trenches. I know I have that number 2 on this one, but that was meant to be number 1. It's the matchup in the trenches. And there's 2 aspects to this. It's you've got to perform well on the edge like you did against Georgia. You just have to. And I think the Ohio State tackles remind me of the Georgia tackles. They're big, they're long. I think that their left tackle is more athletic than Georgia's left tackle, but he's a natural guard. You got to try to take advantage of that. I think Donovan Jackson did a pretty darn good job in the second half against Abdul Carter when he was forced to play left tackle against Penn State. And so but here's the thing, you got to win on the edge, Trev. I mean, this is such an important part of this game. You've got to be able to win on the edge and get some pressure on the quarterback. And then the second part of this matchup is the one up the middle. This is where I think Ohio State is in a bit more trouble in a matchup against Notre Dame because they're down their All-American center. He's out. Their right guard's a big kid, solid player, but not a great player. And their left guard situation is also been impacted by injuries this season. So, Donovan Jackson is normally your left tackle or left guard. He was an All-American this year. He was a first-team All-Big Ten guy as primarily left guard, but at times you had to move him out to left tackle, and he played tackle in the playoff game against Texas, and he played tackle against Penn State. So he's done it at times. It's not like he's never done it, but he's not playing his best position. Well, against Texas, he handled himself. He gave up 1 pressure the whole game. Their right tackle, however, gave up 4 pressures according to Pro Football Focus. Their right guard gave up 2. Their left guard gave up 2. Their center gave up 2. Their other guard, Austin Sareveld, who comes in the game, gave up a pressure. All 3 of the sacks that Pro Football Focus has Texas is getting in that game were against their guards. So, there's 2 different aspects of this, just like we talked about in the Georgia game. This is kind of a repeat of the Georgia matchup, Trev, because you've got to win on the edge. And you talked a lot about that going to the game. If you can win on the edge against Georgia, you've got a chance. And those were good Georgia tackles who, as I said, I think the first sack that Monroe Freeling gave up all season was against Notre Dame, and they got him 3 times. Hopefully you can have a similar success against Donovan Jackson, who doesn't give up a lot of pressures. And there's a reason. Some guys are All-Americans because of reputation. Let's be honest about that. That's not true for Donovan Jackson. But look, Penn State got him twice. Even though he held his own, he still gave up 2 sacks. Problem is Notre Dame doesn't have Abdul Carter. You know what I mean? But that worked against Georgia. So I think that edge battle is huge in the pass game, and it's going to be big in the run too, Trev. You got to set the edge better against this team than you did against Penn State. But up the middle is where Notre Dame could have an advantage. Edge, it's hold your own, make some plays. Up the middle, it's you should be better. You've got to play that way. And last year, a big success Notre Dame had is Riley Mills and Howard Cross played really well against Ohio State last year up the middle. You don't have Riley Mills and Howard Cross isn't 100%. Can Gabe Rubio step up like he did, I thought, at times against Penn State? Can Donovan Heinisch have a big game? Can Howard Cross – this is the last game that young man's ever going to play in Notre Dame uniform. Is he going to just kind of hey, I'm I mean, he's going to let it all hang out. That's not a question, but is he healthy enough for that to result in him playing like the All-American he was last season? That's what we'll find out. So this matchup is going to be super intriguing, Trev, and it's really ultimately where I think the game is going to be won and lost and we're going to have a similar talk tomorrow about the other side, right? And it's going to be huge.
At the end of the day, for Notre Dame, all roads lead back to the trenches. And there's going to be no better opportunity for Marcus Freeman to kind of showcase what his program philosophy is of wanting to be built around the offensive and defensive lines and in the national championship, right? Like you literally can't play in a bigger game like this in college football. Literally can't. And no, I agree with you. I'm going to be paying very, very close attention to that battle in the middle because it's going to be something where, and you hit on all the points, so I won't beat a dead horse, but those three guys specifically have to have games. And I'm not talking about like, oh, they had moments. They have to have games, right? Like these are the matchups where we've talked about it ad nauseum. Yes, we've talked about it ad nauseum this year, man. When Notre Dame's defense is at its best, it is stiff up the middle in the run game, and it is generating pressure up the middle in the pass game. Like that's when their defense is at their best. No questions asked. Now, the edge rushers against Georgia, to your point, Brian, were a pleasant surprise. Like we had talked about it in the pregame of like if this happens, Georgia's going to have a long day on offense, which they did. They scored 10 points, right? I don't know if there's a tough day scenario in that Ohio State's offense is held to 10 points. Like it's just for Notre Dame, winning up the middle is going to be huge. So I'm right there alongside with you, man. Paying attention to that battle in the trenches, especially up the middle, is going to be absolutely huge.
Another one, obviously, it's going to be Jeremiah Smith against your secondary. And I say that focus primarily on the outside corners. But Ohio State, as we said earlier, they're going to find ways to get him matched up against Jordan Clark. They're going to find ways to get him matched up against the safeties. What's Notre Dame's answer in those situations? What's Al Golden's call? Is it any different if he sees Jeremiah Smith in the slot compared to playing outside? Do they switch? Do they, if he's in the slot and somebody else is outside, do they put Jordan Clark outside, who has played some outside corner, and then have Leonard Moore or Christian Gray play inside? That's going to be an interesting way to look at it. I'm curious to see how it's going to go. But I think he's going to get his yards in this game, Trev, but it's like we talk about a lot. Yeah, he's going to get his yards, but you need to make him earn those yards, and you need to make him not as efficient when they're throwing the ball to him. That's always such a big part of these matchups, Trev, is look, Tyler Warren's going to get his, but what they needed to do a better job of in that game, in my opinion, was you had to make them less efficient when they threw him the football. We talked about that being the key in that game, and they didn't do a very good job of that. He was targeted 7 times, and he completed 6 of them. Now, there was a couple times I would say that they did a pretty good job of locking him down, which forced Drew Aller to scramble, including on a key 3rd down where they stopped him short of the sticks. Yeah. It also locked him down on that. He was looking at Tyler Warren on that interception at the end of the game. He had to go away from him because they locked him down, and that doesn't necessarily reflect the statistics. But that's part of it. But if you can say, hey, look, Jeremiah Smith catches 6 balls for 90 yards and he did it on 8 targets, that's a rough day for you. If he catches 6 balls for 80 yards and he has to do it on 13 targets or 12 targets, that's a much better performance because that means, 6, 7 times you forced zeros, and those are going to be big parts of this game is create more inefficient. Now, if you can shut him down the way that you did Marvin Harrison the last 2 years, great. But I'm not expecting Christian Gray and Benjamin and Leonard Moore to be Benjamin Morrison. If they are, great. Yeah. But I'm not demanding that the way that you kind of felt Benjamin could last year. And also they use him a little bit different than they used Marvin Harrison Jr. last year. They will get him matched up against other guys. They'll move him around more than they did with Marvin last year. And I think that's a big part of it. You got to keep him from taking this game over, especially early. Yeah. They're going to go to him because he got shut out last game. I promise you, I'll be shocked if I'm wrong on this. First 2 drives of the game, we're going to see at least 3 or 4 throws that are just geared towards we're getting for the football. Mm-hmm. And some of them will be like little screens. Some of them are going to be we're going to do something to isolate him, and we're going to take him, like against cover 1, they're going to throw a slot fade to him early in the game. I'll be shocked if they don't do that against Jordan Clark or a safety. Shocked if they don't do that. I could see them trying to get into 12 personnel to try to bait Notre Dame into going into their base personnel and then doing something to try to, motion him across and get the Notre Dame's corner chasing, and then he runs a wheel route off of that, something like that. I absolutely think that we're going to see them early in the game force the ball to him. If you can make them not effective in that, then that's your chance of getting off the field early against Ohio State. I don't know if you agree with that, Trevor, but I'll be shocked if they don't try to force the ball. Not force the ball like Will Howard's going to throw into triple coverage. What I mean is game plan is geared towards we've got to get Ford the football early and get him into a rhythm because their offense is better when Ford's rolling.
Yeah, I mean, they even tried to do a little bit of that against Texas. Like they were trying to get him some jet sweeps. They were trying to get him out on some screen plays, and it wasn't working. And so I think you're going to see a little bit of a mix of both. It would not surprise me early if on the first or second offensive series there's a shot deep downfield before. That would not surprise me in the slightest, especially like when you go back and you look at I think if Jeremiah Smith is matched up on Christian Gray, they're taking a shot. I don't think that they would do that against Leonard Moore because to me now, like the true freshman thing is gone. Like it's not they might pick on Leonard Moore because he's a true freshman. Like he is now no longer a true freshman. Like, you know what I mean? Like, yes, he is, but his performance on the field has kind of proven otherwise. Christian Gray, on the other hand, has been a little bit susceptible to those big plays really ever since like the Virginia game when he started giving stuff up to Malachi Fields, and then it kind of turned into the USC game. He was caught flat-footed against Arian Smith, and I think that the corners played an outstanding game against Penn State. So, good bounce back game there. But if I'm weighing my odds of who I'm taking a shot against, if I'm Ohio State, I think it's going to be 29, not 15. But I think it's going to be a little bit of both. I think that they're going to try to get him screen passes early. I think that they're going to try to get him on some jet sweeps, like just anything to get him more involved in the game plan. Because what defenses have done throughout the season is then they really hone in on 4. They start contributing a lot of resources on 4. And that's when Emeka Egbuka can start killing you. That's when that happens. So containing Jeremiah Smith early is imperative. And again, it goes to tackling in the open field, keeping everything in front of you, no blowing assignments, no blown coverages. And so that, along with just overall secondary, the matchups that have to matter is your guys have to just go make more key plays than Ohio State's guys. Like I said it at the start of the show. When you have the opportunity to pick off a pass, got to complete that play. Not really so much worried about Xavier Watts doing that because he's done it again all season long when he's had the opportunity to make a play on the ball. But Christian Gray, when you have that, like he's done it when the lights are the brightest, like they said it in the Here Come the Irish show is like they call them franchise for a reason. And when the lights are the brightest, but sometimes when the lights aren't the brightest and it's just the middle of the second quarter, you don't have to wait till the end of the game to get a game-changing pick six. You don't have to wait till the end of the game to pick off Drew Aller to put you in field goal range with 33 seconds left on the clock. You please feel free to do it in the second quarter if given the opportunity. So win the big moments and contain 4. Huge for the secondary.
I got a little stat for you, Trev. We're both stats nerds, so I love it. This year, Ohio State has, that game. So that's 7, 12, 13. And see here, 4 times Ohio State this year has been held to in the 20s or lower in points. And in each of those games, they scored 21 or fewer offensive points. So I'm including the Texas game. And in those games, when you look at the production from Jeremiah Smith, he's had 13 catches for 163 yards in those 4 games. That's Nebraska, it's Penn State, it's Michigan, and it's Texas. I'm not even including the Indiana game because they scored over 20. But in that game against Indiana, if you want to talk about, where they were held to 20 points in a traditional manner, they didn't have a 7-yard touchdown drive off of the turnover. You could throw that game in there too, 3 catches for 34 yards. Like, it's not a coincidence. In games where he has had 80 or more yards receiving, they have scored 52, 56, 38, 35, 31, 45, 31, 42, and 41 points. It's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not a coincidence that Ohio State has struggled to score against Notre Dame the last 2 years, and Marvin Harrison didn't have 100 yards combined in those 2 games. It's not a coincidence. If you keep him in check, you got a shot. If you can't, they're going to score. I mean, it's accomplishing both of those is not easy for either team, but it is that simple for me to sit here and say that.
Right.
There's another matchup that I like in this game, Trev, that I think is going to be very interesting, and it's the matchup of the Notre Dame linebackers against the Ohio State running backs. This is a huge game in every aspect of the game, Trev. You got to make tackles on Travion. They had a bad fit last year and a hold that wasn't called, which it's SEC refs. It won't get called again this game. If you hold Cam Hart or Benjamin Morrison or if you hold Christian Gray or Leonard Moore the same way that they held Cam Hart in that long touchdown run, it's not going to get called. You have to fit better at the linebacker level in the run game. Can't afford to overrun plays. Can't afford to be a gap too narrow when you're playing backside. You have to have great gap integrity at linebacker. You're going to get opportunities in the hole to hit their running backs. You got to stand them up. Can't let them hit you and then fall forward for 3-4 more yards. And in the pass game, you've got to be disciplined and keep them in check. When they get the ball in space, you got to bring them down in space. This matchup between the Notre Dame running backs or the Notre Dame linebackers and the Ohio State running backs, and I'm including Quinshon Judkins in this in the run game, but especially Travion Henderson is huge in this game. And it's from a run fit standpoint. It's a tackling standpoint and not letting them get yards after contact in the run game. And it's absolutely about the pass game. If you can keep Travion Henderson from ripping off big plays, you've got a really good shot at slowing this offense down with the way your secondary's played. If you don't allow Quinshon Judkins to gash you with big runs, you've got a shot to keep Ohio State in check. When did Ohio State start to take control of the game 2 years ago? It's when they started, Mayan Williams started just gashing them on the run game, right? What broke the game open last year and forced Notre Dame to be in comeback mode? 60-yard touchdown run by Travion Henderson. Those have been the keys. They haven't beat you throwing the ball the last 2 years. They beat you running the ball. Not for volume in both games. It was volume 2 years ago. It wasn't volume last year. That's going to be key. And I think the Notre Dame linebackers are going to be a big role. And when you get your opportunities for negatives, you've got to create negatives when those chances are there. If you got a chance to tackle a guy for -2, it's got to go for -2. You can't let him make you miss and get 2 yards. Now you say, hey, look, that's a good play for the defense. It's only got a 2-yard gain. I get that, but I'd rather have the -2. The -2 is better. You think about that in the Penn State game. If Jaden Ausberry takes a little bit better angle on that play where Tyler Warren drops back to pass and he's ground.
Yeah.
I think they scored on that drive.
I think, yeah. Singleton punched it in.
You get a chance to tackle him 3-4 yards behind the line of scrimmage. You got to do it. Now, what's the benefit that Jaden Ausberry will have in this game compared to that one is neither of those guys are 6'6" with really long arms. They can kind of stiff arm you and keep you off of their body. You know what I mean? That's a different kind of matchup. You know what I mean? But it's still a key point. And up until that game, Jaden had been great in space. And so it's not a coincidence that he wasn't in a game against a 6'6", 260-pound tight end. But like he also got beat on a wheel route, and Will Howard's not going to miss that the way that Drew Aller did, in my opinion.
Right.
So this matchup between the running backs and linebackers is going to be huge, absolutely huge in this game, Trev.
Oh, it's monumental. Look, everybody's going to talk about the Ohio State pass catchers and Will Howard, rightfully so. But the way that I look at this is when you're going up against the Jeremiah Smiths and the Emeka Egbukas and the Carnell Tates in this high-powered passing offense, what you can't do is let the running game hurt you. Linebackers are going to play a huge role in that. I like when you play against big-name players like that, they're going to get theirs, right? Like winning these matchups looks different than when Notre Dame played Virginia, right? Like winning these matchups is not letting them completely take over games, not letting Jeremiah Smith do what he did to Tennessee and Oregon, right? I mean, not letting winning a matchup for in games like this is Indiana not allowing Jeremiah Love to go 98 on half of a knee and with the flu like that.
And Jadarian to bust a 20-yarder to set up their next touchdown. Right.
Right. So you have to keep it in check, but really good players are going to get theirs. And I've been a huge proponent of that. I've been talking about the first time that I said that was Ohio State's matchup with Notre Dame in the 2015 Fiesta Bowl. Like that's kind of when I started watching football a little differently. And that's when they had Zeke Elliott and all those guys. And I said it again in 2022 when Notre Dame was playing USC. It was, look, Caleb Williams is probably going to win the Heisman Trophy. He's going to get he's going to do some crazy dancing around, running in the backfield, amazing play. That is what it is. You can't let USC establish the run. You can't let them run the ball effectively on you. And they had over 200 yards rushing in that game. And so it's just, to me, this matchup is huge. The linebackers are going to have to tackle better than what they did. They're going to have to fit better than what they did. And when 32's in the game, you have to be aware of him just kind of slipping out of the backfield.
Mm-hmm.
You do. And when Quinshon's in the game, man, you get, like, he is a hard runner. Like, I know I kind of take slight jabs at him, and like, that's not me saying that he's a bad running back.
He can be a hard runner. Yeah. There's times I've seen him make some business decisions.
I have
that against Oregon. You know what I mean? But I don't think he's doing that in the national title game.
No, I don't think so either. And for the most part in the playoffs, he's been
physical. He was very physical against Texas.
He was. And so, the way that I look at that is Notre Dame's linebacking core this year has been great in tackling. And not only have they been like fundamentally sound, they bring the wood when they want to. And when two's in the game, it's got to be a little bit more of the same thing, man, because he's going to bring it. And I never played defense, but the thing that I was always told is you'd rather dish out punishment than receive it. And so that's got to be top of mind. So fundamentally sound tackling, know where 32 is whenever he's on the football field, and tackle well, man. Tackle.
I played defense my senior year of high school, and that's a fact. Hitting someone doesn't hurt as much as getting hit.
Yeah.
It's a fact. So I can support that. Look, I thought the linebackers played great against Georgia. I thought they played really well against Indiana. They got to play like that. That's the key.
Yeah.
They didn't play great against Penn State.
No.
And that factored into, I mean, it's part of that's Penn State played well. I mean, you tip your cap to the opponent sometimes. I mean, but there was also opportunities where the linebackers had bad fits. They took bad angles. They didn't properly recognize wheel routes coming out of the backfield, and that that hurt them. And Penn State's running backs played really well, but when they needed to step up in the third quarter and get stops, they did. And you're going to need that early against Penn State. And we'll get into the keys to victory about different aspects of what you need to do early and that kind of stuff in our show later in the week. But I think that's and look. There's other matchups we could talk about that are sort of side matchups. I think the Jordan Clark versus Emeka Egbuka matchup could be huge in this game. If Jordan Clark can again keep Emeka in check, you're going to see at other times where the safeties are going to have to be on him. I think that's a really big matchup in this game. We could kind of do this all day long. You could throw Cardinal Tate into this conversation where you guys can't let him kind of get into his thing and go off. That's another big matchup. We could break down each, like we said with the offensive line, we kind of did it as a whole, but we could have spent 15 minutes talking about the edge battle. We could have spent 15 minutes talking about the interior battle. But some of these battles, Trevor, about hold your own. Linebackers versus running backs, just hold your own. You don't need to dominate them, because if you hold your own, you're shutting down the run game, right? You don't have to. If you dominate them, that's great. Offensive line on the edge, got to hold your own against their tackles. Got to hold your own and win some. Inside, you got to dominate. Against Jeremiah Smith, got to hold your own. Against Emeka Egbuka, got to hold your own. Against Cardinal Tate, I'm sorry, you got to dominate that one. I mean, if you're the cornerback room we think you are, that you got to dominate that one. So those are all aspects of it where you look at it and say, hey, this is going to be a big one. But I think one of the most intriguing matchups, Trev, and we'll just end with this, and this is something you're going to write an article about here this week, is I cannot wait to see the matchup of Al Gold, Mike Mickens, Al Washington, and Max Bulla against Chip Long, Ryan Day, Brian Hartline, Justin Fry, and the rest of that Ohio State offensive coaching staff. Like, that's going to play a big role in this too. And it's about preparation It's about getting your players in positions to be successful and then properly motivating them to play their best football. And I don't mean motivating by like a speech. I mean just building up their confidence throughout the week and to get them where they're just at when the game comes on, they're like, whew, they're wild animals. You're just holding back and just let them go and go see what they do. I'm looking forward to seeing that, man. But that coaching battle is going to be fun, Trev.
Oh, that chess match is going to be fantastic. I mean, and we got a little preview of it when Andy Kotelnicki went up against Al Golden in the Orange Bowl. Like round one went to Kotelnicki. Round two, second half goes to Al Golden for the adjustments that he made. I mean, I don't think people realize that in one quarter they went from allowing 141 rushing yards and a half to -3 in the third. I mean, that's coaching adjustments. Like that's getting your guys to calm down, putting people in better positions to win. And then the players also have to go out and win, right? But no, it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be, again, I can already see it. No matter what the outcome of the game is, we're going to be sitting in the post-game show talking about it was punch after counter punch after response after response after adjustment. It's going to be so much fun to watch, man. It's going to be so much fun to watch.
Can't wait. And it's going to be about who has the better early plan and then who makes the best adjustments. And when you're really dominating your opponent as a coach is like, I found like when I was coaching, when I was counter punching, I was playing catch up. When I was ahead of him and ahead of my opponent and we're always kind of one step ahead of their adjustments, that's when we were rolling. Like that's who's going to be that? Or is it just going to be like punch, counter punch, punch, counter punch? Like it could go one of three ways. And hopefully if you're Notre Dame, you're constantly having Ohio State playing catch up. They think they have your pressure package down and then you bring something different, and we think we have their coverage structure down and then they do something different. It's being ahead of that opponent is going to be key. That's going to be absolutely huge. So I'm looking forward to that. But I think the adjustments piece is gonna be a big part of that. Big part of that.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And I cannot wait to watch it all go down. And after getting myself this juiced up and this excited about it, kind of stinks that we have to wait 6 more days.
Yes.
Kind of stinks. Yes. But outside of that, it's not too bad, man.
Yep.
I'm pumped that we can continue diving into it.
Yeah. Trev, we do have some super chats we're going to get to before we get out of here today. So let's get into those and then we'll roll here. And we'll be back tomorrow at 1:00. We'll break down the Notre Dame offense against the Ohio State defense. So we prepared for that. It's going to be fun. And here is we'll start off with Anthony Solomon. He says, thanks for the show, gentlemen. Thank you for your super chat, Anthony. We appreciate you, man. All right, here we go, Trev.
Super chat from AST12321. Thank you for the super chat. My concern is, can we slow down Ohio State's running without loading the box? I think our pass D can stack up if we don't have to have safeties creep up.
I mean, but that's what Notre Dame does, though. I mean, that's the thing is like Notre Dame has their safeties involved in the run game. That's just what they do. But it's not just the run game. It's also meant to take away some quick game alleys. It's meant to take, if you're a team that runs a lot of over routes from the boundary, you roll that field safety down. What's he doing? He's getting in that lane to take away that. But he's also a guy that is I drop into this lane. If I see run game, I'm accelerating to what my fit might be. And that's who they are. I mean, Notre Dame is a lot of single high coverage team. Well, what does that do? That gets a safety down in the box. It also, like I said, it also protects that screen game and perimeter stuff, but that's who they are. I mean, that's what Notre Dame does. So, but I think to your point, if they have to overcommit resources to stop the run, then yeah, that could be a problem. But Notre Dame hasn't really had to do that a whole lot this year, where they've had to overcommit resources against the run outside of the 2 triple option teams. But that's fine; it's a different animal. So, look, committing extra resources is not what helped them stop Penn State's run game in the second half. It's not. It was they started playing better. They started setting the edge better on the defensive edge, on the defensive ends. Their linebackers are more aggressive, coming down and crashing. Their run fits were more consistent. Like those are all things that we saw them do better. It wasn't okay. We got to get Xavier Watts and Adon Schuler down in the run game, but those guys are both going to be factors in the run game. That's because that's what they've done all year. I mean, they're responsible for a lot of the jet stuff, a lot of the outside run stuff. You can't have – if you're asking Drake Bowen to be the primary weapon against a jet sweep, you're in trouble. And I don't care who you are. If Manti Te'o is your Mike linebacker and he's your primary weapon against a jet sweep, you're in trouble. It's your corners and your safeties that have got to handle that kind of stuff. And that's what they've done all year. So I don't think that's going to change. But if they have to overcommit, to AST's point, then sure. In that case, then yes, I'm more concerned about it. But they haven't really been forced to do that this year. So, and also if Ohio State's running the ball, it means they're not throwing the ball to Jeremiah Smith. I mean, so there'll be some of that. There will be times where Al Gold's going to dare them to run the ball. I'd rather you get 6 with Travion Henderson than 60 with Jeremiah Smith. We've seen him do that at times. And then can you rally to the ball and stop them short of the sticks? That's going to be the key.
Super chat from Michael S. Thank you, Michael. I think this is a follow-up from yesterday, but the Notre Dame equals TCU comments made by 3 Cleveland.com Ohio State beat writers in post-Texas game on-field analysis on YouTube, totally dismissing Notre Dame's capabilities against Ohio State.
Well, if somebody that covers Ohio State compared this to Georgia and TCU from 2 years ago, they're idiots. I'll just say that. They're idiots. If they think that's the kind of mismatch this is, they have completely ignored the 12 games they played before the playoffs started. And have also completely memory hold. I don't know, maybe one of them has a Men in Black, neuralizer. And they've totally, hey, you're going to forget the Ohio State Notre Dame games from the last 2 years. Maybe they've done that. They're idiots. Am I fine with an Ohio State beat writer picking Ohio State to win? Sure. I would too if I was covering Ohio State. I would feel if I studied my team way more than I studied Notre Dame. I'd probably feel the same way. But I'd also say this is a good football team they're facing. And that's how I feel as a Notre Dame guy. Look, I think Notre Dame can beat Ohio State. I don't think Notre Dame has to play out of their minds to beat Ohio State. They just got to play their game. It's what they've done all year. There's areas where they match up better against Ohio State than Ohio State does against them. There's areas where Ohio State matches up better against Notre Dame than they do. End of the day, Trev, you got to play your game. That's where Notre Dame is now as a team. Play your game. Because if you play your game, then you're going to keep them from playing theirs. That's what that means. It doesn't require them to play out of their minds way better. That's not what's needed. Just like Ohio State doesn't have to play out of their minds way better to beat Notre Dame. So if there's actually anyone who covers Ohio State who said this is a TCU Georgia level mismatch, hate to break it to you, but you're not Georgia from 2022. You're not.
No, that team beat you.
And this is definitely not TCU. So if you think that, you're going to look like an idiot again, like you did the last 2 years when you predicted blowouts against Notre Dame. And you had that one moron last year who couldn't even – I can't name a single player about Notre Dame. That says more about you than it does Notre Dame, right? That's the most self-owned thing I've ever seen a media person say. I don't know that I can name a single player outside of being named like one guy. Well, then that means you don't actually follow college football. You just cover your team like an idiot because you don't actually have any interest in knowing about what you're going to play. Well, but most people that I know that cover Ohio State aren't that way. They're going to be very overconfident in Ohio State's ability to beat Notre Dame, but they're going to respect what Notre Dame does. I've already seen it from people. I've already seen people that cover the team say, hey, look, I think Notre Dame's going to, Ohio State's going to win this game, but Notre Dame's no slouch. They're going to have to earn it. That's most of what I've seen. I don't know who these guys are, but if they actually said that this is a TCU Georgia type of matchup, they're idiots. And I don't have a problem calling people in the profession that I'm in idiots because some people are. And if they actually said that, they're idiots. I just still have a hard time believing they actually said this is like a Georgia TCU matchup. I have a hard time believing that. I really do. How can you be in this business and be that stupid? I have a hard time with that, especially after what you just watched. It's not like you just boat raced Texas. You know what I mean? Texas was a yard away, 1st and goal with 2 minutes left of tying that game. You know what I mean? Well, Texas is better than Notre Dame. Based on what? Based on what? Their impressive performances against Georgia twice? You know what I mean? I have a hard time with that. I really have a hard time with that.
Oh, I do too, man. I mean, look, Michael S., I don't know if they are beat writers and you're using that term loosely, You know what I mean? Like if they say they cover the team, but the way that they do it is never go to practices and never go to games. They just watch it on their couch and like write about it themselves, beat writers, then I guess. But yeah, like a lot of those takes I'm seeing is on, like Twitter from like fans, from, the trolls, whatever you guys want to call them. Like that's who I mostly see those takes from. Like
And those people don't speak for Ohio State media, just like people
no,
that Notre Dame fans that say silly things on Twitter don't speak for us.
100%, 100%.
Right.
So I also have a hard time that it's like a Bryan and Trev or a Bryan and Vince equivalent for Ohio State saying these things. That would shock me. That would surprise me.
Very much so. Got a super sticker from Brian Richmond. Thank you very, very much, Brian. I appreciate that. Hey, Brian, if you had a question that you wanted to go with this, but it wasn't in here, go ahead and throw that in to the chat now and we'll see it. But I didn't see anything when we tagged this one. So go ahead and throw that question in now and we'll get to it if you're able to do it before we wrap up here. Got another one from Michael S.
Thank you, Michael S. Equated Day's win over Texas with Smart's win over Ohio State, guaranteeing win against weak Notre Dame. I think that's a follow-up from his first.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, I don't.
If that's what he said, fine. I mean, or they.
That makes no sense. Especially since Notre Dame literally beat Kirby Smart. I mean, like, it's just the dumbest. Like, did you not know who Notre Dame played coming into this matchup? Like, seriously?
I've had so many conversations, like not even on Twitter, just from like I have friends who are Ohio State fans. Like I've worked with former people who are Ohio State fans, and it's all I've heard nothing about Notre Dame's cakewalk in the playoffs, and it's like, well, 2 of the 3 teams they beat were your best regular season wins because they were. And then, we get into, well, you beat Georgia with a backup quarterback. Our wins over Tennessee and Texas were better. And it's like, well, no, they weren't because Georgia beat both of them. And that backup quarterback led the comeback against Texas
in losing the SEC
Texas championship, right?
When the backup quarterback got put in the game.
So it's just, it's tired conversations. It's a lot of narratives. Michael S., my advice to you, man, is you just tune all of it out. I don't let stuff like that.
I don't know why you'd even waste your time listening to some dudes who write for Cleveland.com. You know what I mean? Like, seriously, just don't even waste your time.
Yeah.
That's like getting all riled up about that idiot reporter for Georgia that was like, they're going to blow them out. Notre Dame doesn't have the NFL talent that Georgia does. I'm like, well, okay. Well, then Kirby Smart must be a horrible coach because I just watched Notre Dame just out-athlete you the entire game.
Mm-hmm.
So, sure. Go ahead and keep. But, like, I hope the Ohio State players and coaches 100% agree with that. I hope the Ohio State players and coaches think that this is going to be like Georgia TCU in 2022. Come into this game with that mindset. I just know they're smarter than that.
Yeah.
But I hope I'm wrong. I hope they do look at Notre Dame as inferior. I do, just like Georgia did. And see what happens. I hope that's their energy. I just don't think they will. Ohio State didn't get here to this stage by being that kind of team against a team. Like, I do think they felt that way against Michigan, but they had good reason to feel that way about Michigan.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Because they were superior to Michigan. They just played terrible.
Super chat from the Duder. Thank you for the super chat. Saw the movie Glory the other night. The best scene. If this man should fall, who will lift the flag and carry on? That's Notre Dame football. We got this. We will see you in the fort, boys.
Love it. Glory is a movie for those who don't know about the Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about an all-star cast of people in that movie. I mean, that was a very much an all-star cast of people. I haven't seen that movie in a long time.
Super chat from Dynastic Vision. Thank you for the super chat. Are you hearing anything about what the final offensive line starting lineup will be come Monday night?
I mean, I expect it to be. At first, it's going to be determined by what Rocco does the next week. But I would, even if Rocco can't go, I would hold. I mean, even if he can go, but he's limited, I would hold him back.
Yeah,
and have him be my emergency guard. I would go with the lineup that they went with in the second half.
Notre Dame released their depth chart.
Did they have Tosh at left tackle?
Tosh is so left tackle is listed as Tosh Baker or Charles Jagasaw. The starting right guard is Rocco Spindler, with Charles Jagasaw being the reserve at right guard.
So then they're kind of playing with him a little bit.
Essentially, yeah.
So but here's my thing. If you're gonna play Charles Jagsaw at left tackle, then every snap he takes this week needs to be at left tackle. In a perfect world, Rocco's healthy in your right guard and Charles Jagsaw is your left guard in a perfect world. But you can't have Rocco playing right guard the way he did against Penn State. And that's not a criticism of Rocco. Rocco at times has been their best lineman this year. At times. And he gave them everything he had against Penn State. Trev, you and I were talking about this before the show. That kid emptied the tank for that game.
Oh,
he just could get nothing off of that right foot. He could get or was it his left foot? But he could get no push off of the injured ankle that he had. None. And he couldn't go. He couldn't give it. He was tapped out. I mean, he didn't tap out because he's a battler, but he was tapped. He had nothing left. If that's where he is health-wise going into this game, you're better off with Tosh and Charles in the starting lineup. If Rocco is healthier and good to go, then I'm totally fine putting Rocco at right guard and Charles at left tackle. But if you're going to mix and match Charles Jagsaw at guard and tackle during the week of practice, you're setting up to fail. You're setting him up to fail. So if you're going to go with him at left tackle, he needs to take every rep that of hit, maybe not every rep on first team, but you need to take every rep at left tackle. And if you don't start Charles Jagsaw in this game, I'm going to have some words for Joe Rudolph after this game.
Yeah,
we're going to have some words
because there is no way that you can look at the performance of 56, and this isn't a shot at Rocco. It's not a shot at Tosh. There's just no way that you can look at the performance of 56 in the Orange Bowl and look back and say, yeah, I don't think he should start somewhere.
Right. Now let's just say they don't think he can play 70 snaps again. Okay, then cool. Start him at right guard and bring Rocco in every third series. Or start him at left tackle and bring in Tosh every third series if Rocco's healthy. And it's not about him being better than first. He is better. He's the most physically gifted lineman on the roster, and the only one that can compare to him is Gerby Lambert, who's not going to play. And he was projected to be a starter. So the reality is you've got to get him on the field. You've got to start him. And if you don't think he can play 70 snaps and rotate him out every third series. But if Rocco was healthy and then I'd say put Charles at left tackle. But if Rocco's good to go, so they don't have Charles Jagsaw listed in the starting lineup on at either spot.
No, it goes Tosh Baker or Charles Jagsaw.
So he's listed number 2 at both positions, essentially.
Yes.
If that's how I think they're just playing games. I don't put a lot of stock into depth charts. I've told you this, but I think they're just kind of hedging their bets and going to veterans. But if they don't start Charles Jagsaw in this game, we're going to have some words. I don't care if they win. We're going to have some words about because I had somebody say, "What a great decision by Joe Rudolph to put Charles Jagsaw." He didn't make that decision. Rocco got hurt. You know what I mean? Like you should have been able to say, "Look, he has nothing left in the tank. The kid's giving me everything he's got. He got nothing left in the tank. We need to get 56 in there." You shouldn't have needed Rocco to get hurt to recognize that you needed to get 56 in the game. It's just nonsense. Absolute nonsense. So, but again, I'm not ripping them yet because I don't know that that's what they're going to do.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And yes, he is number 2 because every time Notre Dame lists it, Summer or the guy on the top of the line starts every time. They've had Jadarian Price as the starting receiver the entire season. They've had Chris Mitchell as the starting receiver for a long time. Jordan Faison starts every game. They've had Jaden Harrison as the at slot the entire season. They've had Jaden Thomas as the at X the entire season, and they don't start. So he is listed number 2. So they've used ors all season, and the never starts unless someone's injured. So that's really it. But again, I'm getting fired up just because, honestly, that's my lack of faith in Joe Rudolph's decision-making. I think he's done a lot of good things coaching his position this year, but I have to say I've had a lot of questions about his decision-making on who plays where. Just like the minute you decided Anthony Knapp was your left tackle, you should have moved Billy Shrout to left guard. You shouldn't have needed Billy to get hurt and then come back. And then, you should have never put Sam Pendleton in a situation where he was starting next to a true freshman. Ever. That's a terrible decision. You should have put Billy over there to begin with. And we've had a lot of these conversations. So my hope is that this is just gamesmanship or them not caring about what's put in the depth chart, whatever, That could be it. Since Rocco's not ruled out, you still list him as a starting right guard. That would actually make sense to me, right? And Charles is, number 2 at left tackle. That it would make sense to me to put the depth chart out like that, even if right now your thought is probably Charles is going to start. So that's what I think is actually going on. But I'm just a little triggered sometimes when I see things like this, because this would not surprise me if Joe Rudolph made that kind of decision, because we've seen him do that a lot. And hopefully that's not the case, because then my optimism about this game, like if they start that game with an injured Rocco Spindler at right guard and Tosh Baker at left tackle, better hope it works. Better hope it works. But I don't think that's what we're going to see, actually.
I don't think so. I would be very shocked. I would be extremely shocked if that happened.
Yep. So, yeah. So we'll see how that goes.
Super chat from Chris Deasy. Thank you, Chris. Can we ask Michigan if we can borrow their uniforms? Seriously. Thanks for all that you guys do. Coverage all year has been unbelievable, but especially this postseason. I'll be at the game. Are you guys planning events?
No, we won't have any events down there. We're still working a couple things out about travel, but we won't be able to have any events down there at this point in time. But I think I said this before, but one of my favorite memes was I think it was the Tennessee game, or maybe it was the Oregon game. I think it was the Oregon. It was
Oregon,
where somebody put a meme out, and it was like, maybe Oregon can switch to these uniforms at halftime. It was like Michigan's uniforms. It's really funny. I was like, that's pretty good.
Yeah,
that's pretty good. But no, nobody has a better uniform than Notre Dame, so they don't need that Michigan energy. But why has Michigan performed as well as they have against Ohio State this past year, and then some of the other games? It's because they beat them up front. That's what it comes down to. They beat them in the trenches, and Ohio State still had guys make plays and at skill positions, especially in previous years. So it's not like they held them to 10 points this year, but I think they scored over 20 each of the last 3 years that they lost. They still got over 20. This game was a bit of an anomaly. So, but yeah, I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah,
that was funny.
No, I would much rather Notre Dame win in the trenches than wear that hideous American cheese yellow. So,
do you remember back when it was fluorescent? Do you remember that era when they were like fluorescent yellow? Those were hideous. Those were absolutely hideous. Yeah. I'm not as big on the Michigan uniforms as some other people.
No,
the winged helmet doesn't make sense. Like, your mascot's a Wolverine. I don't understand.
I don't get that either.
Delaware rocks it better. That's all I'm saying.
Hey,
Delaware rocks it better. So yeah, no ugly maze, no ugly maze in the game this week. I will say this is just kind of for fun, but these are two of the most iconic uniforms in college football. I think Penn State has very overrated helmet uniform. I think it's dull. I think it's what they've always done. They've never gone away from it. That's fine. It's ugly. It's boring. It is. I don't think there's anything special about, just like I don't think there's anything special about Alabama's uniforms. Now, Alabama's success in those uniforms is great. There's nothing special about it. I think Ohio State and Notre Dame have, even as a kid, as a Notre Dame fan, I still loved the Ohio State Scarlet, because they've always had like a little bit of a twinkle, and then you get all the stickers, and I mean, it's just the scarlet and gray just pops. They're both great uniforms. Ohio State's had some versions of their home uniforms I haven't liked, like when they put a lot of black in the sleeves. Remember, they went through that phase. But when they keep the traditional, it's primarily scarlet and gray. Those are sweet uniforms, and so are Notre Dame's. It's going to be a good-looking championship game, Trevor. I don't know how it's going to be played, but this is going to be two historic uniforms in this game. There's no.
No, they're going to look great. No, I'm excited for it. I'm with you. Like Penn State's uniforms, like they. Yeah. I mean, they kind of just look like, when you see like the Russell Athletic commercials, and it's just like a generic football team running plays.
I wear New Balance, right? I wear New Balance, right? Shoes, because people are like, you're too young to. I don't care. They're comfortable, and I'm not spending $200 on a pair of shoes. I'm 46. I can spend my money on other things. But it's like they're like the New Balance. Like, it's just boring. It's just, it gets the job done. It's just kind of boring and comfortable. Gets the job done. And I'm not a hater of rival opponent uniforms. I love USC's uniforms. I think they're awesome. I love Ohio State's uniforms, and they do it right. It's just Penn State's is just freaking boring. It's white with a navy blue stripe. They don't even put stickers on. Like, that's what I think is, like, Ohio State doesn't have like a logo. They've got the stripes down the middle, but that they get the stickers that kind of fill it up. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, like, it's just, You know you have an iconic uniform when you don't need your logo on it to like show who you are.
Right.
Like that's why I love Ohio State's. That's why I love Notre Dame's. You can look at that. I mean, if somebody just handed me a white helmet with a navy blue stripe, I would ask them if they bought it at Dick's Sporting Goods.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like legitimately. But if somebody handed me a gold helmet, I'd be like, hey, it's Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Like if somebody handed me a silver helmet with all the stickers on it, I'd be like, hey, where'd you get the Ohio State helmet? Yeah, I'm with you.
Yep. Like Texas has a pretty plain uniform, but that Longhorn just pops, and then the rest of their uniform looks good. You know what I mean? I think I like Oregon. It's funny. Some of Oregon's uniforms I freaking hate. Some of them I love. But when Oregon goes with a green and yellow, like a traditional green and yellow, like the normal green with the yellow green helmet and the yellow O, I think those are sweet. I do. Florida State's uniforms now I don't like. I loved their uniforms when I was a kid. I thought those were sweet. I like Clemson doesn't have I love their helmets, and especially when it's funny. My favorite Clemson is when they go orange helmets and purple and purple.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. Like the orange and orange is fine, but I love the purple and purple with the orange helmets. I don't know what it is about that, but it looks really good. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of uniforms I like. I just think Penn State's uniforms are super overrated. Like if you're like 90, I can understand you like them. But yeah, I said this actually. I don't like a lot of alternate uniforms on traditional teams, but I don't know what it is. And I know a lot. I've read some LSU fans don't like it, but the uniforms LSU wore in the bowl game, the white and the purple, I thought were sweet.
Yeah.
Those looked really sharp.
Yeah.
Really sharp.
I like LSU's uniforms. I do. Like I do think it's a little goofy that most home games they wear white. Like I still don't know why.
Yeah, because this is tradition. Like the Redskins used to do that, But the Redskins I understood because their white and maroon were sweet, and the Redskins used to have the best helmets in the NFL. Like those were sweet. That was a sweet logo. But it's tradition. But I like LSU when they've got purple, purple in their uniform. I do. But I just, and I usually don't like messing with helmets. I usually like, look, dude, this is your helmet. Rock the helmet. Like I get annoyed that Oregon wears like a different color helmet like every game. Like, dude, you got a sweet helmet when it's the green and the yellow O. Why mess with that? LSU is one of the few traditional programs that will change their helmet color that I actually like it. Not when they remember that there's one time they went like purple helmets.
Yeah, I remember that.
But when they go white on purple, I actually thought that looked sweet. I did. But I'm trying to think of some others. But yeah, these are two of the best uniforms in college football.
Easily.
They just are.
Yeah.
They just are. I mean, when Ohio State played Miami, though I've always liked the Miami's helmet. I think that's it. Like you see it, like, oh, I know who that is. You don't have to have a lot going on for it to be a sweet helmet. You just got to give me more than just white with a blue stripe. I'm sorry. You just need a little bit more than that. But, when USC played Texas, those are two iconic uniforms, dude. But Notre Dame and Ohio State absolutely have iconic uniforms. And then I was glad Notre Dame wore the alternate greens last year. That was pretty sweet. But yeah, I'm glad this game's going to be blue and gold versus scarlet and gray. It's going to be sweet.
One last set of uniforms that I really like are Tennessee's. I don't know why. Like I really like Tennessee's uniforms.
Well, that it pops. I mean, like the orange pops. There's just something about the orange. We talked about USC a little bit ago, but I actually like Tennessee when they go orange and orange too.
Yeah,
like when they go all orange. But I like them in their white, orange, white. Those are sweet uniforms.
Yeah,
they are. I didn't like him when they went to the black uniforms. It's like, dude, you got a good thing going. I don't know why you would mess that up. That's what I like about what Notre Dame's done when they've gone with alternate uniforms this year. They didn't mess with the helmet. And they didn't mess with the colors. That's why I was so mad about if they would have gone black. You didn't mess with your colors. I mean, you wore blue and white. You wore green on white. You were worn green on green in the past. You've worn white on white. It's still all the same colors. Like, stick to what your colors are. Like, Tennessee's colors are orange and white. What are you doing all black uniforms for? If Texas Tech I used to love Texas Tech's all black uniforms. Those are sweet. And then when they go black, red, and black, those are some of my favorite uniforms. But that's your school colors. When Army wears their all black against Navy, I think those usually Army's uniforms in that matchup are usually fire. in my opinion. Like they're usually really sweet. But it's got to be part of your school colors, man. I just can't stand like we're going to just wear this random color that has nothing to do with our school, but it looks cool. I just think that's lame. My personal opinion. I think that's lame. And like you said, Trev, Tennessee's got a really good looking helmet. That T did not look good on a black helmet.
No, I didn't think so either.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. My girl NH says Tennessee's orange is obnoxious as their fan base. She doesn't like the orange. She doesn't like the orange. I kind of like those. I do. I do like those. I do like those. Any that you hate before we wrap up? Any uniforms that you hate? Not traditionals or alternates. I mean, but a traditional helmet or traditional uniform you hate. Besides Penn State's boring uniform.
Yeah, none that I hate. Like it's just I think there's some that are like overrated. You know, like we touch on it. Like I think Penn State's is overrated. Like I do think Alabama's is a little overrated. I do. Like it's fine. Like it doesn't do much for me if I'm being honest. It's like I see it and I see, like you think of the iconic program and you think of Nick Saban and Bear Bryant. I get that, but I don't look at it. I'm like, yo, those are sweet.
Get me one of those. Yeah.
Right. Like that doesn't really do much for me.
I do like their white on white. I do like their road, the way it looks on the road better than the way it looks at home.
I do too. Yeah, the road ones look good. Definitely better than at home.
Yep.
But outside of that, none that I can think of like right away.
UCLA's got some sweet uniforms. I love their uniforms.
Do.
We did talk about we don't like we did say Penn State's. I don't like Michigan's uniforms. They're yellow. Speaking of teams whose yellow doesn't match their helmets, but can't complain too much about it because Notre Dame's had an issue with that. But I like Florida's traditional uniforms, the blue and the orange helmets. I think those are sweet. Their blue on blue is the version I hated is, remember there's been times they've gone with orange pants and the blue.
Yeah.
Those are hideous.
Yeah, I don't like that.
Those are hideous.
The white pants for sure.
Yeah.
White pants or the blue pants.
Yeah. When Maryland vomits their flag onto their helmets, like that's hideous. Like your colors are black and red. It's hard to mess up a black and red uniform. Like you can have some sweet combinations with a black and red uniform. And then they just vomit the state flag on their helmet and you're just like, you ruined it. You had a chance at something sweet and you ruined it. You really did ruin it.
I like Washington's uniforms, like the purple and gold. I like that. That's a dope color combination.
When they went with purple helmets, I hated it.
Yep, I did too.
I hated it. Yes, their gold and purple is when they go gold, purple, gold. That's my favorite. I didn't mind the purple on purple though. I'll say this. You know what though, Trev? I liked the blue on blue that Michigan did last year.
I did too.
That actually looked sweet.
I did too. Not too much yellow. Like I have no issue with the blue. It's just that is such an ugly color of yellow. Yes. And the less I see of it, like they say it's maize. I call it American cheese yellow. I think it looks crazy. Like if I go to my fridge and get a slice of American cheese and put it on a pair of Michigan uniform pants, it will blend in. It will look the same.
Yeah. Somebody just said I might be alone on this, but I actually kind of like Ole Miss. I love Ole Miss's uniforms when they go with the light blue.
Yeah,
when they have the light blue
is so
with the
sweet.
Red jersey.
Is so
sweet. I don't love the powder blue helmet, the powder blue jersey. I don't dislike it, but when they go powder blue with the red and the white pants, those are sweet. I like those. Those are some of my favorites. If you'll notice, I like powder blue. I mean, that's why I like UCLA's uniforms. North Carolina's can be good at times, and sometimes they look dumb. Like they've had a hard time getting it right from a football standpoint.
Yeah, I think North Carolina's jerseys can be really busy sometimes. Yes. Like sometimes it's very much like they just have like random designs, like just all around their jersey, and it's like, yo, like
those I get it. You're good on basketball shorts. They don't look good on football jerseys.
Yeah.
Somebody said the FSU powder blue this year sucked, and I love powder blue. Yes, that because again, I think part of it was it doesn't match with the colors that they tried to match it with the gold and maroon, and it's just not. I mean, I know there's some history to it, but they're just no. You got that maroon and gold that pops, dude. Don't mess with it. Don't mess with it. A team who's got good colors that they just haven't been able to get their uniform right is NC State. Yeah. They just can't get their uniforms to really stand out the way that they should, in my opinion. Yeah, those are ones I don't like. Somebody said Boise State's are terrible. They're not great. Their helmets are too busy, in my opinion.
It's too busy. I do
like their blue, all blue.
I like their all blue. There has to be either I think there has to be a darker color to help offset it. You can't have like that style of blue and like silver, because like you kind of like look at it and you're like, what?
They need to use the orange more like they
Yep.
used to. I mean, you had the orange and white popped when they were really good and they would go all blue. I
Like when
like it
Kellen Moore
better,
was
and I
there.
do like their all blue better when if it was on a new. I would like it even more on a neutral field, like in a bowl game.
Oh yeah.
But it gets a little bit like, okay, I can't see what's happening right now because it's all blue uniforms on a blue field, which that can get a little bit gross. Yeah, I can get a little bit gross. So yeah, I've had some little fun talking about favorite helmets. I do like Illinois' helmets. I do. The way that they matched orange and I mean them and Syracuse look very similar. I like both of those. I like that Syracuse hasn't gone away from the S. I think that looks sweet. I like their uniforms. That when they go orange, blue, orange, I think those look sweet. I've always liked Syracuse's uniforms, especially back in the day. I mean, I used to like when they had like the mesh back when Marvin Graves was a quarterback. Those look pretty sweet, in my opinion. Not gonna lie. I don't like West Virginia's version of blue and yellow. That reminds me too much of Michigan. But I don't mind it as much when they go blue, white pants. That's when I like West Virginia's uniforms. But when they wear the yellow pants, either home or away, I'm like, okay, I'm done. I'm done with your uniforms. You look like a weak Michigan. That's what you look like. But when they go blue, white, those look pretty sweet. Nebraska is one of those teams that I think has a plain uniform that I just like. I don't know what it is. I just, it's a base end. I don't know what it is, but it's not a whole lot different than Penn State's outside of the end. But the red, I think, looks sharper. I don't know what it is. They're home uniforms anyway. I think they're road uniforms, white, red. I've never liked.
There's a lot of uniform sets. There's a lot of uniform sets in the Big Ten that I think are just like very fine. Mind you, most of the colors are red. Nebraska, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Rutgers, like
Indiana.
Right. I mean, it's a lot of red. But
yeah, that's true. That is true.
Big Ten, the Conference of Red.
Yeah.
So
red and maroon. You know, Minnesota at times can do some stuff I like.
Yeah,
there's times I usually don't like yellow helmets, but theirs works when they go with the yellow and the maroon and the white. That works for me. Yeah, it works for me.
Yeah.
So anyway, enough uniform talk. That was fun. I enjoyed that. But Notre Dame just needs to rock the blue and gold, baby. Blue and gold against the scarlet and gray, two of the best.
Mm-hmm.
And it just shows you don't need stuff on your helmet to make it look good. It just has to be more than just white with a blue stripe. So don't be lame. That's all I'm asking, Penn State. Don't be lame.
Don't be lame. If you guys
we'll have a lot to say about Penn State this offseason when we're looking at college football because they had some big announcements the last couple of days. They sure did. By the way, with both running backs and Denai Dennis Sutton both announcing they're coming back. Yeah. Huge. Because if they'd have lost one of those backs and both ends, that'd have been a big loss. But both backs are coming back. They got two good portal pickups, solid portal. One's a good portal pickup. The other's a solid portal pickup at receiver. And then you get Denai Dennis Sutton coming back next year. I think his game's going to take off next year. So they've actually had a pretty good start, whereas Texas has everybody's leaving. That has a chance to leave, even guys that shouldn't be leaving. So that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in the offseason.
Yeah, I'll have a lot to talk about with that one. Yeah, and why that's happening. You know what I mean? Like why are these guys leaving? Well, most of those guys were transfers, so I don't know what you expected. So, but yeah, that's going to be an interesting offseason. Penn State and Ohio State are going to be, without question, in my opinion, number 1 and 2 in the Big Ten going into next year.
Oh yeah,
I think Oregon takes a little bit of a step back in my opinion.
I think so too. Yeah, I think so too.
So they'll still be very good. I'm saying like they're going to be third. I think it's Ohio State and Penn State are going to be the teams to beat in the Big Ten next year. We'll have all offseason to talk about that one, buddy. All offseason. And I hope that the conversation in the Big Ten is what can we do to get back to winning championships like we did in 2023. We don't like that we lost to Notre Dame in the championship game. We hope that's the storyline.
Yeah, hopefully.
Anyway, Trev, why don't you take us out of here, buddy?
Yeah, you got it. Thank you guys for being with us for just a hair under 3.5 hours. We have a lot more content coming at you guys. We're going to continue covering this matchup tomorrow. Bryan and I are going to be back here at 1 p.m. to talk about the Notre Dame offense versus the Ohio State defense, which is going to be another crucial matchup. And we're going to be coming at you at 1 o'clock for the rest of this week. We'll be having shows on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday's up in the air. And then, of course, Monday, we are going to have the pre and post game show. So a lot of content coming at you, but to make sure that you guys stay in the now, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and your family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review on any platform that you watch this on, whether it be Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. But of course, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. That's where all the exclusive content comes out. That's where the film breakdowns happen. So that is the best way to stay in the loop with us here. But until next time, that's Bryan. I'm Trevor. We will see you guys back here next time on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.